grateful to say we have a number of members with us as well. It's remote, and I'm delighted that even for this last meeting that we've had this opportunity to have face-to-face debate. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government Scotland Act 2003, the Provost has directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. In accordance with Section 50A of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973, the public are excluded from this meeting, as it is likely that if members of the public were present, there would be a real and substantial risk to public health, infection or contamination with coronavirus. The meeting will be live on the Council website. Now I ask for Mr Moody to do the sederant. Thank you, Mr Moody.
Thank you, Provost. Provost Buchanan.
Present.
Provost Ritchie.
Present.
Councillor Aitchison.
Yes.
Councillor Alexander.
Present.
Councillor Balfour.
Present.
Councillor Binney. Councillor Bissett. And we have apologies from Councillor Black. Councillor Blackwood.
Present.
Councillor Bowes.
Present.
We have apologies from Councillor Coleman. Councillor Colley.
Present.
Councillor Coombs. Councillor Flynn.
Here.
Councillor Garner.
Present.
We have apologies from Councillor Goldie.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Kerr.
Present.
Councillor McHugh. Councillor McCluckie.
Here.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
Present.
Councillor Munro.
Present.
Councillor Murtagh.
And Shot.
Councillor Nicholl.
Present.
Councillor Nimmo.
Present.
Councillor Patrick. Councillor Russell.
Present.
And Councillor Spears.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Moody. That takes us to item 2 in your agenda papers, declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I will read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? None recorded. Thank you for that. That takes us to item 3, which is the minutes and information bulletin. Item 3A is the minute of meeting of Falkirk Council held on the 8th of December 2021. It's pages 5 to 33 on your agenda papers. Have we any questions for that minute? Or can we agree the minute?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Takes us to item 3B, minute of special meeting of Falkirk Council held on the 20th of December 2021. It's pages 34 to 37 on your agenda papers. Have we any questions arising from that minute? Can we agree the minute?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That takes us to item 3C, minute of meeting of Falkirk Council held on the 19th of January 2022. It's pages 38 to 44 in your agenda papers. Have we any questions arising from that minute, or can we agree the minute?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 3D, minute of special meeting of Falkirk Council held on the 2nd of March 2022. It's pages 45 to 48 on your agenda papers. Have we any questions arising from that minute? Can we agree the minute? Agreed. Thank you very much. Takes us to item 3E, minute of meeting of Falkirk Council held on the 2nd of March 2022, pages 49 to 54. Any questions arising from that minute?
Provost.
Fine, Councillor Murtagh, thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, it's a question in relation to there was an item, I think it's on page 52. It's to do with the update to the capital strategy, and in that, and also in the I'll just ask it now because it was included in the minute, of the, it would have been in the executive of the 22nd, also where on the carbon budgeting paper, it was noted within that report, which was agreed, that there was the intention to bring a paper to this council. It was an explanatory paper for members, but regarding carbon budgeting. So I wondered if the director could perhaps give an update on, obviously that's a slightly different intention now, it's not here, so to just keep us on track with that item of business, please.
I'll ask Mr. Benny to come in here. Thank you, Mr. Benny.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Councillor Murtagh, for the question and the opportunity to update elected members on this work. Firstly, I'm pleased to say that carbon budgeting is underway, the project's on track, and officers in my service area are working closely with finance on the rollout across the council. And I plan to bring an update on this activity to the new council later in the year. Having considered a report to this council, it was clear to me that the activity did not require a council decision and that the carbon budgeting project didn't have a financial resources or legal implication on the council at this time. It was also my view that we needed to wait for the outputs of this transitional year in 22-23 in order for me to be able to bring a report that fully informed elected members, allowed them to fulfil their scrutiny role, and gave me the required information to answer the questions that councillors would rightly have. As I said previously, I'll do that later in the year, and I hope that reassures Provost.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks, Mr. Benny, for the answer. I think it's just really important that to have that noted as a sort of slight change in intention, but really welcome to hear how that important project is on track and progressing. Thank you very much.
Agreed, thank you. That takes us to the supplementary agenda which you received, which is 3F, which is a minute of the special meeting held on the 15th of February 2022, pages 2 to 8 on the supplementary agenda. Any questions for that, or can we agree? Agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That takes us to volume of minutes. Volume 3, 2021-2022. From the volume of minutes. None? Can we agree the volume of minutes then? Agreed. Thank you very much. Can we have a question? Thank you, Councillor Nimmo. And apologies for maybe one or two interludes here, but it's just the way the technology is. Councillor Nimmo's got a question. Thank you, sir.
Sorry, Provost, I actually put my hand up a bit too quick there. It was in relation to the information bulletin I had a query about.
Hey, thank you. We always before you. Fine. We'll get. Okay, are we agreed to the volume of minutes? Agreed that. Agreed. Thank you. That takes us now to. But we're going to the information bulletin. It's on that, I think. Okay, it's information bulletin, volume 3, 2021-22. I believe that Councillor Nimmo has got a question on it. Thank you, Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Provost. It's just a quick question in relation to page 38. It's to do with the mental health text messaging service. I realise, obviously, that this has only started from the 1st of March, but I'm just wondering if officers could maybe give us some sort of indication as to the uptake of the service so far. Thanks, Provost.
Mr. Naylor.
Thank you, Provost. As this is only very recently gone live, I don't have any detail on that, but I can ask my colleagues, and if there's any of that information available, I'll send it on to Councillor Nimmo.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Provost.
Okay, thank you. So, the information bulletin, are there any other questions from it?
Provost.
Councillor Kerr and Councillor McHugh, thank you.
I wondered if I could go before Councillor Kerr. Just to highlight the fact that the mental health service for our young people was fully discussed in great detail at the Education Exec yesterday, that Councillor Nimmo was part of. So there's a lot of information out there, and the service went to great lengths to say that they will be obviously monitoring the service and tweaking it as and when necessary. Thanks.
Provost, I wasn't disputing that at all. I merely asked a question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerr, question.
It's probably not a question, but it's something that I bring up every full council meeting. It's on page 8, Provost, and it lands in Mr. Binney's police services, where we've got collection of provision, onward sale, cast iron lamppost, collection of onward sale. These are incomes, and I've asked previously if they can be noted as income. I understand that these quotes still need to go out to different companies, but looking at it, you would think we were paying that money. We're actually getting that money in. So I just asking for the next, if it'd be possible for the next council just to highlight that these are incomes. I don't know if that's possible or not.
Any other questions then for the information bulletin, or can you agree it? Agreed. Thank you very much. That is the rolling action log, pages 55 to 61. I'll pass you over to Mr. Moody. Thank you. Once again, it's apologies that I believe Councillor had her hand up. Councillor Monroe, was it on the information bulletin?
No, it's on the rolling action log.
Well, we're still to hear the report yet, so we'll come back to you as soon as the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. And the relevant updates are provided on the rolling action log in the comments column, and there for the opportunity for members to ask questions on any of the items contained therein. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Monroe, we're back to you. You got a question in the rolling action log. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost. On 5458, read the council headquarters and art centre update. There is a paragraph that states it is essential that this report aligns with the recommendations of the complementary SPR report, and I would like to know at what stage we actually linked the SPR, which of course has all those potential cuts in it, with the HQ Arts Centre, because I have no recollection of this having been agreed. Thank you.
Mr. Benny, I believe we'll come back to you for a question.
To you, Provost. Thanks for the question, Councillor Monroe. Apologies, I can't speak for what's happened before my time at the council, but it's my view that when I bring forward a report on the headquarters and arts centre, that it would be expected of me that councillors would want to understand the numbers of desks required for officers across the estate, and also the sort of buildings that we will retain moving forward in order to inform the size of a headquarters that we would require. So given that we know that we're bringing a report on the SPR very soon after the summer, and that would be the earliest opportunity that a update could come forward on the HQ. It's my view that the two are quite closely interlinked. I'm not suggesting necessarily at this point that the SPR report is about the HQ, but I think there's a real interlink between those two projects, and I just want to make sure that they come forward at the same time.
Okay, and I believe the Chief Executive would like to come in as well on this issue. Mr. Laurie?
Yes, thank you, Provost. Good morning to all. Just to say that when we did bring forward the SPR report, most recently the implementation plan in May of last year, one of the three main work streams was about office space. So the HQ project has always sat in the context of that element of the SPR work. Although it's been taken forward with a series of separate reports, it's always been closely linked and part of the SPR. Thank you.
Given that the SPR report and recent documents that the budget included massive closures for Bowness and Grangemouth and other facilities, it seems to me unfortunate that the two things should be linked in this way, and it sends the wrong message to our communities.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Provost, could I?
Yes, you want to come in?
Just comment there that I think Councillor Munro is misleading, because there was not massive cuts related to the SPR in the budget. There has been no decisions made on buildings. And I think it's a bit disingenuous to say at this meeting that there has been, because members have still to take decisions on that. And that's why Mr Benny has got further work to do to bring that back to members.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go back to Mr Benny. I think he believes he wants to come back in and give us some additional information. Mr Benny?
Thanks, Provost. I think the council leaders already explained the point I was going to make, which was that the SPR project that I'm responsible for and leading hasn't actually delivered a report yet to council. So the options that may or may not have been put forward earlier this year were not linked to that project, and I want to bring forward a much more a rounded and filled out proposal that elected members can fully scrutinise later this year.
Okay, thank you for that. I believe that Councillor Coombe wants to come in, and just to reiterate that questions on the role and action log, we're not wanting to enter into any long-winded debates, although it's really important. Councillor Coombe, you got a question on the role and action log? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Provost. It's the same item as... Gosh, I must be retired already. I can't remember. Lynn Munro just brought up from the rolling action log there. But it was an item that I noticed in the minutes on the capital programme on page 258 in the minutes of meetings. It was about the capital programme of Falkirk Community Trust, and it states that there's £60,000 set aside for Muir-Avonside to resurface the roads.
I'm sorry, Councillor Coombs. I'm sorry.
My question.
I'm sorry, but yeah, fine. Thank you.
My question is that, given that the points that Councillor Munro mentioned about the review of the SPR, and it says in the rolling action log that a report will be submitted to the executive as soon as possible, and this will make recommendations on the future council estate. So these two things, I'm just wondering if somebody can tell me how they tie together, because if Muir-Avonside, that decision has already been made, does that mean that Muir-Avonside isn't at risk of any possible closures that, as we've just heard, have yet to be decided? I think I said this at, in fact, March last year at the decision to take the trust into house. I said that no decisions would be made until after May. So can somebody tell me how these two pieces of information fit together?
Okay, we'll try and get the answer for you. It's a direct question.
Thank you.
Mr Smaley, you coming in on this one?
Thank you, Provost. I wonder if I can maybe just offer some assistance. I think what Councillor Coombs is referring to is a component of the rolling capital action plan of circa £500,000, which the Trust gets every year. And that's broken down with various components. And that sum for Muir-Avonside is just part of that. So it is distinct from the wider picture.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Binney, you got a question?
Yes, I've got a question on the report titled Equal Pay, as a matter of fact. And I know this
Sorry,
is
Billy. Convener.
progressing since. Sorry.
Sorry there.
I had a follow-up question.
Follow up, carry on then. Apologies for that. Didn't you know?
It's just to say again, and it'll probably land on Brian's desk. Within the budget papers, it said that the trust was going to have £1 million worth of savings. That was plugged against that line.
No.
Given that this report tells us.
Excuse me. We're deviating away from the questions in relation, direct questions, the role and action log. So we'll go to Councillor Binney. Sorry.
I'm reading the role and action log, and I would like to ask a question about the timing of it.
Right, fine, carry on.
Pertinent.
Just a direct question, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It says here that we will be getting this back on the 18th of October. The £1 million was an annual saving that was plugged in to the budget. Does that mean then that that £1 million will have 5 months? They'll have 5 months to find that £1 million because it's 7 months after the budget.
Okay.
In October.
That's to me, that's a direct question there. Thank you. Mr. Smale, going to come back in on this one?
Thank you, Provost. There was a sum agreed as part of the budget. It was a lesser sum than a million, which was to be the subject of a review reflecting the need for the respective directors to assimilate the new trust services into their portfolio of services and assess the optimum configuration of those services and realignment of the services as part of integration. So it was recognised that sensibly that needed a bit of time for a fully considered and objective assessment to be made of what that configuration or those configurations would be, and from that would flow proposals to deliver the sum that was built into the budget, and that could well include enhanced income from the services provided by the trust.
Okay, thank you for your input, sir. Councillor Binney, got a question?
Yes, I've got a question. It's about the equal pay, as a matter of fact, and we're all aware of the cost of living at present, especially the low-income Falkirk Council families and that. I note this has been progressing since 2016. I welcome that. However, the last bit says a final update will be submitted when the outstanding cases are settled. Do we have any indication when that will happen, considering the times at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you for your direct question there. I think we'll bring in Karen Algie. Karen?
Thank you, Provost. We're actively working on these cases on a continual basis, Councillor Binney. There are only a handful of them left to be settled. The vast majority have already been settled. So it's only a very small number by comparison to those that we actually had. And it's in everyone's interest to get these settled as soon as possible. There are the ones that are outstanding, there are some unique circumstances about them, which is why they're taking a little bit longer, but we're actively working on them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions in relation to the role and action log? Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. It's 591, motion adaptations to housing. This came before the council, I think, in December, and we agreed at the time to give 3 months for it to have a report back. So I just wonder if I could maybe get an update, a broader update than what's in this role and action log, please. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, sir. Patricia Cassidy, will you take this question on? Are you there?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
A bit of a delay there. Yeah, as elected members are probably aware, we continue to be under, sustained pressure across our system with significant demand both from the community but also from the hospital for care. And as I indicated at the council meeting, it would be challenging for us to make a lot of progress on this, given those current demands and our staff absence. We've done the initial scoping work, and we're also working with Scottish Government, who are doing a bit of a review at the moment on the guidance around aids and adaptation. So we would plan to align ourselves with that work and to bring a report back later in the year for council's consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your succinct answer there. Councillor Patrick, got a question?
Yes, thank you, Provost. First of all, under equal pay, since this is the last opportunity for this council, could we receive a verbal update, please?
Thank you for your succinct question. Karen, would you be back on this one?
Yes, thank you, Provost. I don't have the final numbers with me today, Councillor Patrick. As I explained for the previous question, we are actively working on it. What I can do is get information on the final numbers that we have outstanding, and I can certainly circulate that to members if that would be acceptable. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you for that, Provost. Could I also refer to page 58, again under the SPR issue? It mentions there that a report was being submitted to the Executive on 18th January. This, in fact, did not, as far as I can see from my reading of the report of the Executive. Could we get a comment on that one, please?
Mr. Benny, would you like to come in here, sir?
Yeah, through you, Provost. Once again, I began in post on January the 10th, and this is one of the key projects that I'll be taking forward on behalf of the council. Hopefully everyone would understand that I need an opportunity to review that, particularly with Paul Kettrick, who joins this week the council as the new head of Invest Falkirk. And it was important that for me, I took a leadership role on that and review the whole project progress to date and bring forward a report to council or executive that I'm confident fully reflects what we're doing and where we want to go.
Okay. Okay, any other questions on the rolling action log, or can we agree it? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And apologise if maybe I was a wee bit curt in coming back, but we're trying to get direct questions, and sometimes, including myself, people maybe take a wee bit longer to get to the main thrust. Okay, that takes us on to item 5 this morning on your agenda. It's the Treasury Management Strategy. It's pages 62 to 87. Before we go into the summary of the report and recommendation by Mr. Smale, can I just say at this stage that this is Mr. Smale's last meeting the council. I know there's some members as well that's going to be in the same boat. But Mr. Smale, I could say I've known Brian for many, many years. Since I came on the council initially. He's been a wonderful officer, and he's continued to be a wonderful officer, serving this council and the wider community. We'll wish him all the best, whatever he's going to be doing when he's leaving. Also, Brian is going to be succeeded by Amanda Templeman, and we wish her all the best as well in her new role, and I'm sure that she's going to continue the success that Brian has had for so many years. I'd like to pass on now to Councillor Meiklejohn, the leader of the council, in relation to a summary in relation to Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and I'm glad that we've had this opportunity to say our goodbyes to Brian. He's been with the council for a very long time and has served us well over the years, and been very helpful to all of the elected members in trying to explain the very complex array of funding streams for local government. It's something I think that we learn a wee bit more every day, every year, around the complexities of it. But just to reflect on some of the key moments of Brian's memorable points, particularly in council, is the occasion that he did indicate that he was going to do a quick run up Falkirk High Street wearing his boxer shorts. Again, I reflect on a conversation I'd heard on the radio about accountants being boring. While there may be many that look at people in those particular roles and think that their only focus is finance, I know that Brian has very many other interests. And another very surprising interest was his great love of music, it's something you can certainly not say is boring, is Brian attending a silent disco in Edinburgh city centre at the festival, and has visions of him boogieing along the Princes Street. So don't judge a book by their cover in that respect. There's an awful lot more behind them than just facts and figures and finance. But I do wish Brian all the very best in his retirement. He's in a lovely part of the country, and I hope he's able to spend time and enjoy with his family as he looks to what he's going to do with his yonder years. And I'm sure he will be finding plenty to do, and wish him all and his family good health. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. We'll echo the sentiments that you said, and we'll pass on to Councillor Kerr to say a few words.
Thanks, Provost. Obviously, our group has benefited from Brian's wealth of experience in all the years that he worked at the council, and I'm sure that the longer serving members of our group, John and Malcolm, will have had the same cooperation and the same help over the years. I'll be brief, Provost. I just hope that Brian has many years for his trips around South America in the coming years, and I hope that he goes to many places that he's always wanted to visit. And finishing up, Provost, our group wishes Amanda every success in the future. I'm sure that she will rise to the challenge. She's big shoes to fill, but I'm sure she will do that. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you for your contribution. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. I've already spoken to Brian personally, so he knows my thoughts about him and how professional he is. So I echo the sentiments that everybody said. He's certainly an efficient, professional officer and very committed to public service. And he's always given politically unbiased answers, and to try and navigate yourself through that over the years must be very difficult, but they're always straightforward, non-political answers, and he gives you very detailed information, and it is hard to sometimes navigate through all these financial figures that come along, but he does try to distill it down for everybody to make it simpler. And I'll always remember the low-hanging fruit and stuff like that, and I'm trying to get that image of Brian running up High Street with his boxers on in my mind. But I'd just like to thank him for his time at the council and his very professional manner and his help that he's given to the group. And I'd also like to congratulate Amanda on her appointment. I think she's going to be a very able successor for Brian, and I wish them well for the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. I believe that Councillor Spears wants to come in and say a few words. Councillor Spears, the mic's yours.
Thank you, Provost. Just to wish Brian a long and happy retirement. My memories of Brian is that he didn't just serve the council, he served the people. And if you went to him with a personal inquiry or an inquiry on behalf of somebody, he would take up that with the same gusto that he would take up fighting for a big agenda item. He would give the same level of attention to an individual's inquiry, and that always augured well with myself, as I would imagine with every other elected member. I've not met Amanda yet, but I wish her every success in her role. She's taken on a big job, and she has big shoes to fill. So I wish her all the best.
Thank you very much for your input, Is there anybody else would like to speak? Okay, then I'm coming to you, Brian. You've heard everybody speaking about you, but unfortunately, Brian, you're still earning a crust, and we're asking you now to come forward with your summarising the report and the recommendations contained within. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Provost. And if I may just preface it with a profound thanks for those very kind words from members. I would just simply say it's been a privilege to serve Falkirk Council over those 40 years, and I wish the Council well in the future. So, as you say, Provost, to the Treasury report. So this report is required by the Treasury Code, and in normal circumstances would first have gone to the Executive for consideration. It's the first in a suite of 3 such reports that will come before members. There'll be one interim report, which Amanda will present around halfway through the financial year, and then a review report, an outturn report at the end of the financial year. It's worth noting that the report sits within the framework of the capital strategy that was agreed and approved at the March budget meeting. You'll see the structure of the report set out in the bullets at paragraph 1-2 at the front end of the report. So I'll look just to go through each of these sections and maybe draw out a couple of the key points that I think members would be particularly interested in. So we kick off with section 5, which notes updates to the Treasury Code. And the main change there really relates to restrictions on investment in commercial property. And that's come about by the situation in England. It's not been an issue in Scotland, but it's perhaps illustrated by the description of one council in England as essentially being a property company with some social services tagged on. That has not been the issue in Scotland, but nevertheless, the code applies across the UK. There's, excuse me, there's mention of risk appetite, you'll see, and I think that's got a wider resonance across the council, and those that sat on the audit committee in particular will appreciate that. We also, I think, should note the introduction of an ESG dimension in terms of the bullet at the top of page 66, and I think that just demonstrates the widening range of this environmental and related element agenda for obvious reasons. Section 6, the economic outlook, I think there's just 2 takeaways, rising inflation and rising interest rates, and the 2, as you'll appreciate, are very closely interrelated. Section 7 picks up in capital expenditure and also captures a couple of the attendant prudential indicators. You'll see the table at paragraph 7.2 shows the significant scale of investment of over £500 million over the next 5 years, albeit this will need to be reprofiled to make it more manageable and realistic, and a separate report will come to members on that in due course. And the table at paragraph 7.4 shows how it's financed, and as you'll see readily from that, that the primary source of that financing is borrowing. We then move on to the loans fund, in effect, internal bank operated by the council in section 8. The regulations require us to include a lot of information here, but a good part of it has been, I was about to say relegated, that's perhaps not the correct term, but contained in Appendix 4. The section also notes the revised loan fund repayment profile policy, which was approved by Council in January and provided savings of circa £5 million to make a huge contribution to help closing the revenue budget gap. And the HRA also benefits from this change in policy, albeit not quite to the same extent, but nevertheless very welcome. Section 9, we move on to the borrowing strategy. At para 9.5, there's a snapshot of the current level of external borrowing, which at that point is shown at 282 million. The table at para 9.6 shows the total estimated borrowing requirement for 22-23 at 134 million. The section also notes, as we're all only too well aware of, the upward trajectory in interest rates. We always knew that was going to happen. I think the question was when and how steep that trajectory would prove to be. And the unexpected rise in the extent of inflation suggests that's going to be a steeper climb than might otherwise have been anticipated. And the tail end of this section, from para 9.16 onwards, picks up on prudential indicators which are peppered throughout the report and which we're required to show. We switch to the other side of the coin in section 10 in terms of the investment strategy. I think the key reference point, the key paragraph here is 10.3 with the hierarchical criteria for lending, the acronym SLI, security, liquidity and yield, with security being at the top and yield at the bottom, and very much reflecting the prudential approach adopted to investment. We don't go chasing marginal interest rates, and remember BCCI and the Icelandic banks, we can see the risk in unduly skewing that criteria. And again, we show the range of permitted investments that we're allowed to select from in terms of our portfolio of investments. And perhaps, Provis, finally to note in para 10.19 that Treasury management training will be organised after the May elections. So if members needed an extra incentive to do well, you now have it. And with that, Provis, if I can just return to the recommendations at the end of the report. I'm happy to take on questions. And I do have reinforcements, I see, with Amanda on the call, who actually wrote the report. So if I get into deep water, I've got the cavalry waiting on the side. Thank you, Provis.
Thank you, Mr Smale. I'll now turn to the Leader of the Council. Councillor Michael John.
Thank you, Provost, and I extend my best wishes to Amanda as well. And I think that Amanda and I have already had a conversation, and we'll look forward to working with her again over the coming years, should things be of an ilk to allow that to happen following the elections. However, dealing with the business that we have to deal with just now, our Treasury management strategy is part of our financial governance. It's essential that we have that in order to have that framework in which to work. One of the key areas in the best value report is around financial sustainability, and having this framework is going to be critical going forward. And as Brian said, this is a suite of 3 reports that come forward at this time in the year, every year, reviewing our Treasury management strategy to ensure that it aligns with everything that the Council would wish to do. That aligns with our corporate plan, our key priorities, and the outcomes that we want to achieve, and the vision that we have for our council going forward, and what it is we want to be able to do over the coming years. Brian spoke very much around the risks and the risk appetite, and because of the very challenging financial circumstances that everybody across the public and indeed the private sector find themselves in, it's something that we do have to look to revisit in that climate, and just do a sense check on where we are, and that will be something that would be very welcome, I think, through the audit committee and the new council, to do that risk analysis and risk appetite to ensure that we are taking risks that can be mitigated and that we are aware of. It's not necessarily about not taking risk, but it's being aware and being able to manage those risks, and there will be huge risks coming down the line that we are not in control of and we'll have to react to. Therefore, it's important that we are cited on that. The Capital Treasury report will allow us to determine what we need to what finance we need to manage over the coming year, but also how we're going to invest, as Brian has said, and I think that as part of our recovery plan, investment is going to be critical, and to where that is directed is going to be far more important than ever before. But I'm confident that we have a report before us today that will help us do that over the next year, and allow us to have the little bit of flexibility where we can around the investment in order to help stimulate the economy, and hopefully will have a positive impact on the Falkirk district area and indeed the council. So on that, I'm happy to move the recommendations in section 2 of the report, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. I have had, sorry, I have the opportunity to speak to Brian privately, and we'll leave it there. I did go and find out some more stuff about your beloved Hearts, but I'll maybe speak to you again about that privately, Brian. On the actual report itself, this is an important report going forward in what we're doing with capital spend. I think, to be honest, in the next 5 years to spend 357 million out of the housing revenue in capital is a huge investment into the housing in the Falkirk area. My worries, and I think it's the same, I would imagine, for everybody, is the financial situation that we're in. I know there's various things that are impacting it. Did pick up in item 9 that also there's still a risk of a no-deal Brexit, which really worries me, because we've got enough at the moment, but it is in the report, and that still hangs over us, unfortunately, at this moment in time. Inflation, as we know, is on rapid going up. They were talking about going to 7.2. They're now predicting that it might be over 9%, and that puts cost up in everything that they do. The Public Work Loan Board, again, the rates from there always look very attractive, but as inflation goes up, there's a potential that they are going to be affected as well. There is a bit of space built in. I have looked at the operational boundary and authorised limit on it. I won't go through that. If anybody wishes to ask, I'm sure Brian would be able to answer quite clearly on that. I welcome, I think, this is my thank you to you, Brian, the 4.7 million of the reprofiling loans, and the 47 million, I believe it is, in the next 10 years on that. It's not a bad gift to give us in the way out the door, Brian. I know probably Amanda's had quite a lot to do with that as well, because I know it's her side of the council business, and for that, thank you. I'm happy to second the Leader of Council.
Okay, thank you. Go straight to Councillor Kerr to see if he's got an amendment from his group.
No amendment, Provost. Just like other groups, we're aware of the challenging times ahead for the council, and we understand that prudent decisions will need to be taken. As already the Leader of the Council and Councillor Bow says, as well as Brian, that the interest rate and inflation will play a big factor going forward, and the uncertainty of the world at the moment plays a factor as well. So if we can get a bit of stability, whoever in the next 5 years in the council, I'm sure that this report going forward will have to be tweaked now and again in the next 5 years, but we're happy with the recommendations, Provost.
Okay, thank you for your input. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost, and thanks, Brian, for that report. We agree with the recommendations. I have 3 questions. The first one is, I note that in section 6 of the report on economic outlook, it was written before the latest Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee announcement. So can you provide any update following the March announcement? That's my first one.
Take them one at a time, Brian.
Okay, Provost, thanks for that. And in terms of Councillor Bissett's question, and reflecting the earlier comments about this upward trajectory of interest rates from a low of virtually 0, which was 0.1, we've now jumped up to 0.25%, 0.5%, and then the most recent one, it's 0.75%. And as a table in the report shows, the expectation is that will soon hit 1 and continue northwards. So, as I say, the trajectory is clear. It's more how quickly the increases happen and where we end up with in terms of what you might regard as a new norm on interest rates.
Thanks, Brian. Second question is, how will our capital plans be affected if indeed interest rates continue to rise?
Provost, through you, I think in very simple terms, the rise in interest rates is a rise in costs, and in the same way that, as members know from recent capital report updates reflecting the broader economic and global climate, construction costs are vigorously heading north, commodities driving that in part, but also labour. And that feeds in to lead to the same answer. So if you've got limited resources, which in reality you have, and your costs, whether it's interest rates or those other elements of construction costs, are going up, it just ultimately means, in simple terms, for the same money, for the same resource, you're going to be able to do less. And I think that takes you into the realms of a careful consideration of priorities. And of course, as you know, there will be a new corporate plan presented to the new council with attendant priorities, and that will set the framework to allow that type of decision to be made.
Thanks, Brian. The final question is, how are we mitigating the interest rate risk?
Well, I guess flowing from what I said earlier, we knew from where it sat that there was only one way it was going to go. So we knew it was going to happen. Unlike the private sector, we're not allowed to use derivatives to manage interest rate risk. So it's really a combination of looking at the mix in the loans portfolio between fixed rate loans and variable rate loans. So if you're in a position where you know interest rates are going to head north, it doesn't make sense to take out variable rate loans because you know they're only going to go one way. So there's a stronger tendency to select longer term or at least fixed rate. And the other dimension forming the judgment of how you manage this is the distinction between long-term rates and short-term rates. Short-term rates tend to be very, very low, so you're getting in the current environment, in your current budget, you're getting the benefit of that, but you also have to think about protecting the position in the future. So there's a judgment as to the mix between how much of your borrowing you do short-term and how much you do long-term. And perhaps the final point I would make there is, again, being responsible and taking or having a strong eye to the future in terms of the periods of loans that you're taking. You want to make sure that you don't load too much on a particular year in the future when you're going to have to refinance that, and leaving yourself unduly vulnerable to what interest rates may be at that time, or indeed general market conditions. So there's a range of things, Councillor Bissett, there in the mix that, along with our Treasury advisors, will be used to inform decisions as we go along. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bissett, for your input. I believe Councillor Munro's got a question. Councillor Munro?
Thank you, Provost. Given that we have capital budget that we receive in the order of 20 million a year, and over the next 5 years, we're already projecting spending 579 million, which is for almost 5 times what our grants are. It seems to me that were an incoming council to wish to invest in something new or additional or different, then there would be a particular challenge in that something may well have to be removed from our current budget. Could Mr. Smale perhaps comment on how much flexibility we have in coming years, given that we have already committed so much? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point that Councillor Munro makes. I think it's relevant to recognise that, notwithstanding the figures in the tables, they're draft programmes insofar as unless a project is legally committed, which self-evidently you are then locked into that level of spend. But most of the projects in the capital programme, or many of them at least, won't have triggered that status. So as members, as time rolls forward, and there will be periodic reviews of the capital position, not just at budget time, but just during the course of the periodic update reports that members will get during the currency of the year from Amanda. The opportunity to reconsider in the light of emerging factors as to whether there's a need to reconfigure. But it was clear and was made explicit in the capital report that was considered as part of the budget on 2nd of March that we already had bids at that point in excess of what could be afforded in the capital programme, and the only way additional or new projects could be accommodated would be by, in effect, substitution, a new project being deemed by members to be a greater priority than perhaps a project that was already in the capital programme. So I think whatever way you cut it, what that's telling us is that you have difficult decisions ahead as to how you use the finite resources that you have available. And the same principle, as you would have heard again on budget day on 2nd of March, applies to, at the end of the day, you can only spend the resource that you have.
Okay, thank you for that. I believe Councillor Coombs got a question as well. Councillor Coombs?
Thanks, Provost. I'm going to have to get in before Councillor Munro in the future, because yet again, the numbers that she's just quoted. So, but it's just a slightly different question, but the extent of the capital spend that's already in there versus the money that the council will have. So the only thing that she didn't touch on was, I would like to know what the main areas of concern, either Brian or Amanda, regarding the borrowing, given the current challenging climate and the inflation rates that we're discussing here today, where borrowing is without any shadow of a doubt going to be a lot more expensive than when these projects were first put to the council. So I know I won't be able to get exact figures, but the sort of impact on these big decisions, and when and how will these figures be reviewed, given that, as Brian's just said, the difficult decisions and the hard choices that the new council's going to have to make.
Thank you, Brian.
Yes, Provost. Ultimately, the control framework set by the Prudential Code, and in a nutshell, that gives councils the flexibility to be able to borrow up to a level that is deemed to be prudent and sustainable, hence the term, the Prudential Code. And just a reminder that albeit the Prudential Code's been in play for a good number of years now, some of us with longer memories will recall the regime that prevailed before, where there was more rigid and direct controls. Basically, central government told you how much you could borrow, and that was the end of it. So we have now welcomed flexibility, but we do, as a council, need to act prudently. So the reference points then become an assessment of what you can afford to borrow. And of course, that in turn takes you to the very closely interlinked question of the pressure on the revenue budget, because what you borrow, not immediately, typically there's a year gap, but flows through to the revenue budget. So you need to, I would suggest, both have a somewhat wider or more panoramic view in considering the capital programme, as well as a forward or longer term view in coming to decisions. And in terms of helping council to assess what's affordable, this is where, at least in part, the prudential indicators come in. And on page 73, limits to borrowing activity, there's reference to the operational boundary and the authorised limit of the amount of external debt. So we have a framework within, a structured framework within which we can operate. But I think the sentiment I would leave you with, the reference point I would leave you with, ultimately, you're taking a view on what you can afford to pay. And that's an assessment of what resources you project having.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Councillor McCaughey, question, sir?
Sorry, Provost.
Oh, sorry. Apologies. You want to come back in there? Thank you.
I would just like to thank Mr. Smale. I would like an opportunity to speak later in my thanks to all officers, but the follow-up question that I was going to ask was exactly what he just touched on just now, about the impact of borrowing on the revenue budget and the service cuts that obviously will bring with it if we've got less revenue to spend because we're paying back more debt. I'm assuming that, as he said, the Prudential Code and the prudent decisions that the council needs to make will be explained in great detail as we move into the new council, rather than just accepting the capital programmes that we as an outgoing council have left behind. Because from what I'm reading, these, as again Mr. Smale alluded to, they can't be afforded. It just concerns me that because they're down there as aspirations, that they need to be looked at very carefully, because again of the impact of capital decisions on revenue budgets that are already very, very strained.
Okay, I'll bring Brian back in just to clarify that point, which is a very important one. Brian, you heard Councillor Coombs there, and apologies for not coming back to you, but I can't see you on the screen, and I thought it was only a one direct question. Brian, would you like to come back in that last area there for Councillor Coombs?
Thank you, Provost. Maybe just to note, if I can draw your attention to the table at the bottom of page 73, para 9.17, which shows where the operational boundary lies. And there's also, perhaps more relevantly, the table on page 67 at para 7.4, which takes that 579 spend, which is shown in the table just above it, and shows how it's going to be financed. So on current assumptions, that programme is affordable and financed by the various strands shown in the table at para 7.4. And as we highlighted as I went through the report earlier, it'll be self-evident that by far the biggest element is borrowing requirement, as you can see in the second line from the bottom. But capital grants is also significant, and where, for example, those prove in practice to be less than is assumed there, either you have to take a view that you would compensate by additional borrowing, or you may take a view that such additional borrowing isn't affordable and therefore something has to give, which takes you back to the question of priorities. If you've got limited resources, which you do have by definition, what are the things that you're going to do, whether on revenue or capital, that most effectively, in effect, give you the biggest bang for your buck? What is most productive in getting you to achieve your priorities and your objectives? And that is necessary, but by definition, difficult and challenging.
Thank you, Councillor Coombs. You happy with that? I think we've all realised that that is the key word in this issue, which will be priorities. Can I move on then to Councillor McCluckie? And then Councillor Alexander.
Thanks, Provost. Obviously a very important item here, Mr Smales brought forward. This is our future, and the uncertainty that we've been having obviously is a big worry to us, because we rely so much on our investment, our capital projects and grants and all different things in the future. It was mentioned earlier that there's also still a worry about a no-deal Brexit, but I was just trying to see if there were any comments at this worrying time. And I know the council's been prioritising the local poverty as a major issue in Falkirk recently, but the government has different agendas. And what about a no-deal independence? Obviously, how is that going to affect our loan payments, our investment, are all folks' pensions that some of us are going to be depending on lately? How are we going to meet the carbon footprints targets? It's British banks, it's no Scottish banks. So how do we deal with that uncertainty? Does Brian have any answers? You know, if somebody puts a big fence up between here and Britain, how we're going to get our ASDA lorries through? But,
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
No. Okay, we've got the gist of that. Brian, I think you got the gist of that as well. You'd maybe want to come in there and come back and Councillor McCluckie's question.
I think you'll understand that I can only reasonably ask in the most answer or comment in the most generic of terms, and simply say that, you know, any material change in a country's configuration inevitably will have market or economic implications, and dependent on the market's assessment of how they view them, that could be positive or it could be negative. So yes, there will be an impact, but those factors would need to be, ultimately demonstrated if such a decision was made, but assessed in an objective manner ahead of such a decision being made.
Will you believe in your crystal ball to Amanda, Brian, when you go?
I'm afraid it's shattered.
Fine. Okay. Councillor Alexander, thank you, sir.
Yes, Robert. Some of us have more faith in our own people and our own institutions than others, and I appreciate that particular point. Can I say, Provost, the issue of getting the bang for the buck, which was mentioned several times by Brian, and that's something that should be taken into consideration. First of all, anytime there's a financial report like this, and there's a financial strategy being developed. Secondly, it was going to involve a great deal of, I think, self-discipline in the new council. An end to the practice of agreeing amendments on a Monday night and implementing them on a Tuesday. There was a recurring cost. Recurring cost to the council taxpayer. To ensure that not only we're going to get a bang for the buck is an end to that particular practice. Also the issue of where we are in terms of the financial position of the council as we go to the future. And yes, there's decisions to be taken, and they're not helped with the ill-discipline that we've had in the past. So hopefully, Brian, you'll agree with me that discipline is all crucial at this point in time and in the future.
Okay, Brian, would you like to come back to the comments made by Councillor Alexander there?
I mean, I think in essence, what Councillor Alexander is saying, that if I've understood it correctly, that members need to assess all the factors that are placed before them by officers, evaluate them, and based on that and their judgment, take measured decisions in the best interests of achieving the predetermined priorities. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Clarify where we are. We're motion moved and seconded with no amendments. There's an opportunity to ask questions. Before we agree, is there any other questions, or can we agree? Thank you very much for that. Thank you. That takes us now to item 6. Which is a standing orders review, and I'll hand over to Mr. Moody, who will summarise the report and the recommendations contained within. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Thank you, Provost. And I think members will be familiar with this item as it was considered at your meeting in December. And as you may recall, it was continued for further discussion. Some of the aspects of the read at that point, in particular, protocol in relation to meetings, and also a particular change that arose from the implementation of the new councillors' code of conduct. But there was, I think, helpful discussion at that meeting on some of the items presented within the revised standing orders. One of those in particular was the proposal that Standing Order 20 be changed to require advance notice of motions which didn't reflect recommendations and advance notice of amendments. There wasn't, I think, a consensus emerging at that meeting in favour of that particular proposal, and subsequent discussions, I think, suggest that there isn't a consensus around that at the present time either. Also, since the meeting in December, it's become clear that one of the key recommendations arising from the best value review was to consider the issue of collaborative leadership within the council. So my assessment has been that it is better to carry forward that particular proposal into the next council to be considered in a broader context of developing collaborative leadership. So that recommendation is not before you in the present report. The other change to the recommendations to the changes to the standing orders from December are to pick up two recommendations which were made in a motion from the floor in December, and I think it's clear that there is much to be said for those particular proposals. They are, I think, logical and an improvement to the standing orders. And for the benefit of members, those are the proposals, first of all, in relation to the presumption of standing within council meeting. And I think we can see we're all seated here today without being able to stand, and that reflects our current practice in any event. And there was also a clarification on the Provost powers in relation to inappropriate comments being made in relation to an elected member, which were sexist or racist, and it clarifies that particular provision to refer to all of the protected characteristics in the Equality Act. And I think that's the logical position to adopt within our standing orders. I'm also conscious, Provost, that perhaps the other issue which raised the most discussion in relation to the standing orders was the question of deputations to the Planning Committee in particular. My recommendation in December was that we should remove the deputation right for that particular set of committees. My concern is in relation to natural justice and ensuring that both the applicant and any objectors or interested parties are represented and that we don't have an unbalanced discussion. But I'm also conscious that there are, I think, good and reasonable arguments that the removal of the deputation right is also one that may create an appearance that the process is closed to members of the public. Overall, on balance, my recommendation remains that it should be removed, but I take no strong or dogmatic view in relation to that, and I'm content for the council to reach its own preferred position on that, and I think that may be a matter for discussion to follow on from the presentation of the report. Otherwise, Provost, the changes to the standing orders remain as set out, as appended to the report. The others, other than those I've mentioned, are largely technical, but I'm happy to answer any questions which members may have. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. I'm going straight to the leader, Councillor Meikle-John. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and this was a piece of outstanding work. It's come at the end of a council, therefore having sort of wide-ranging changes would not be ideal at this particular time, and wouldn't want it to fetter any new council coming in, which may well look to revise the standing orders. However, I do believe that some of the technical changes and some of the minor changes to particularly around adapting to a new environment, particularly this hybrid option, where very as much as a requirement to use the microphones and for people to be able to be heard, not standing, and that doesn't preclude anyone that then has any difficulties physically as well. I'm obviously very in support of the other changes being proposed around the powers of the Provost and having undesirable use of language that could be seen as derogatory or in some way abusive to others. I think it's inappropriate for any elected member to be using that, particularly in a public forum, and that should be indeed checked should that be the case. But I would hope that that's something that we'd never ever have in this particular council. I also recognise that we haven't had an opportunity to have in-depth discussions around the advance notice of motions and amendments, and to be able to have detailed discussions on how that would actually work in practice. And I think that is something that should be taken into a new council and looked at in the round of all the work that is needed to be done around elected member relationships as per the best value report, because there may well be other aspects that will be brought into the changes in standing orders from that, and particularly around the collective leadership. And I think that would be very positive for the council going forward. Our group are still of a similar mind as we were previously with regard to the deputations, and would prefer that we remained with the status quo, recognising that communities, members of the public, etc., do not have access to the same resources to be able to present to council in the same way that developers and house builders or anyone within that corporate setting have. And Mr Moody kind of referred to that when he spoke about that maybe we'd be given a level playing field around the deputations, but I think having the ability to be able to speak to committee in the way that they have, I think that's been very valuable to elected members, to be able to hear directly from those that it's going to impact on the greatest in their own words, rather than only have those that can afford to have formal representation. So on that, Provost, I'm happy to move the report and the recommendations with that caveat that the situation around the deputations remains the status quo at this moment in time. It may be something that will come back in the future, and allow the new council to look at the other aspects of standing orders in the context of the induction and any changes that may well emanate from the work around the best value report. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. I want to echo everything the council leader has just said. Happy to second and reserving the right to come back in.
See if he has an amendment from his group in relation to recommendations contained.
No, we haven't an amendment, Provost, but I'd like to ask a question to Mr Moody.
Yes, indeed, sir.
With regards to anything that we have agreed today, 6-month rule will apply?
That's correct, Provost.
We're quite happy to support the proposal by the leader of the council and review at the next council regarding these issues. But as the leader says, that small variations regarding standing and the Provost's position is only tidying up standing orders, which I think is right. So thanks, Provost.
Thank you for your input, sir. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. We'd like a short recess in a minute, but I'll just say what I'm going to say. We would agree with the majority of recommendations. Just want to have a wee chat about the deputations. Certainly makes sense to carry over the issue of the motions and amendments to the new council, and the other ones about being respectful and all the rest of it makes absolute sense. So if we could just have a short recess just to have a wee chat about the deputations, Provost.
Well, I was going to call for a comfort break.
Okay.
So we'll have a 10-minute comfort break, but add 5 minutes on for you to discuss with your group. So that'll be 15 minutes. We'll come back. I'd just like to clarify exactly where Councillor Bissett and his group could go then for discussion.
Could go into the theatre.
Okay, so we'll come back in 15 minutes. So there's a comfort break for 10, and then allowing Councillor Bissett and his colleagues to discuss. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost.
Thank you. Okay, members, thank you very much. Just to clarify where we are for item 6, standing orders review, we've had a motion moved and seconded. We've been to Councillor Kerr to see if his group has an amendment. He says no, he's happy with the recommendations contained within the report. we'll give an opportunity for Councillor Bissett to go away and recess and discuss the issue with his members. So I'm going to go straight back to Councillor Bissett and ask him for his position in his group. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Provost. We will agree the administration's proposals, but we just kind of wanted a discussion around deputations because we felt that sometimes it can be abused, you know, where people get 2 bites at the cherry. They come along to the planning, they have a hearing as well. So I think that the whole package probably needs reviewed in the new council, but we're happy to accept the administration's proposal, Provost. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. We get you. Councillor Nimmo, I believe you've got your hand up. I can't see you, but my colleagues here to the left can. You got a question, sir?
Yes, I have, Provost. It's a question for Colin. It's to do with the virtual meeting situation. And as I can't see anything in the current standing orders that would cover this, I'm just wondering if there's going to be any future proposals for a standardised virtual background for Falkirk Council meetings, so that we're all the same.
Yes, thank you for that question, Provost. There isn't a specific coverage on a standard background for members in virtual meetings in the currently agreed virtual meetings protocol. There is some guidance on not including some aspects in the background, for instance, around anything that can be construed as a political item, for instance. But we don't yet have anything to suggest a standard background. The virtual meetings protocol is there to be kept under review. It's a protocol for a particular reason rather than within the standing orders, in order that it can adapt to changed circumstances as we develop the use of remote and blended meetings. So I think that's certainly an issue that can be considered in the next iteration of the protocol.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Alexander, then Councillor McCluckie believes got a question. Councillor Alexander.
Got it. Keep running away from me. Just a quick few words regarding deputations. It's obvious that the planning side of the council's responsibilities are very much the areas that we need to ensure complete and utter openness and transparency within that process. We can only tell so much by what we get in prior to the meeting. So it's very difficult to get that balance. It's been mentioned on the other side of the chamber. But we'll keep trying, I can assure you that, because it's important that we are seen as being open and transparent. It's important that we're seen as being listening to people, whether it be for or against a particular application, a particular site, etc., etc. So with that, Provost, I'd like to thank yourself for stepping in for a considerable period of time. I was off earlier on this year, and ensuring that a principle of openness and transparency was continued. And with that, I'm happy to support the motion.
Thank you for those words, Councillor Alexander. I think we totally agree with you in terms of openness and transparency. And during your period as a convener, you ensured that happened. Councillor McCluckie, you got a question?
Yes, Provost. It's just about, once again, about the deputations. I've listened earnestly to what the Leader of the Council said, and then obviously Mr Alexander, who is obviously his portfolio. And I can understand fully the wording for fighting for the underdog, because that's one thing that Councillor Alexander has done his whole life, and spoke for the underdog. And he's not going to be standing next year, and he's going to be a big loss to the council because we all look up to him. I've learned a lot in 15 years, but still only ken half of what he kens. But on deputations, I do see a bit of abuse sometimes. Where it's not just sometimes underdog who's coming in; it's sometimes a developer, and you're also hearing the same person sometimes 3 times, and it can be a bit misleading. I would have preferred if it had been to broaden out what we put in the papers. In the papers, we get a summary for officers on the objections and letters of support that come in. And I believe that should be really expanded and built on, so that even if it isn't material, it might be relevant, and we need to ken the feelings and the concerns of people out there. So I think that would have been the best way to deal it, rather than sometimes hear deputation, because sometimes if it's a developer, you're not hearing for the objectors, or the objectors, you're not hearing for the developer, and there could be economic development in that there. So that's what I felt, but I'm happy to go with the flow, but I just think it's something that needed looked at. But I think that the best way would have been to come with officers, you know, and hear the written in the papers for us as a true way of getting both the representations for supporters and objectors. But that's all I wanted to say on it, Provost. As I say, I'm only an individual, so it's only my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input, sir. And I'm quite sure that the new council, whatever the format, will ensure that the words that was used so frequently by Councillor Alexander in terms of openness and transparency will be the key. Councillor Blackwood.
Thanks, Provost. It's along the same theme as deputations. And my point of view is based on the site visits and their company site visits. And I don't know if they'll ever return again, but if they do, what tended to happen was objectors, applicants and supporters were allowed to speak at site visits. Then we come along to the planning committee meeting, and the same people will come along as a deputation and want to speak again and saying exactly the same thing, virtually word for word. And I was one of the few who objected as planning committee to hearing the same objectors, or the same deputations as we heard at site visits. And that just seemed a waste of time as far as planning committee was going. There's maybe something that should be looked at going forward.
Thank you for your input, Councillor Blackwood, and I'm sure that the new council, whatever the make-up, will ensure that when they're having this discussion, that'll be one of the valid points that comes forward. Okay, we've got a motion moved and seconded, no amendments. Has everybody agreed to the recommendation contained within the report? Agreed. Thank you very much for that. That takes us to item 7, elected members champion. It's pages 171 to 174 on your agenda, and the report is by Mr. Moody. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Yes, thank you, Provost. And like the last item, this is a report which follows on from the discussion at the December meeting of Council. And at that point, there was a request made by the Council to go away and consider the role and remit for elected member champions within the Council, and to consider what the scope of such champion appointments might be. So this report does those two things, and in relation to the role and remit, that's set out in paragraph 5.3 of the report, and the recommendation is to ask you to agree that particular role and remit. And in considering the role and remit, thought has been given to how the role and remit of the champion may complement that of the portfolio holder. And that's also been a key consideration in considering the scope of the number of elected members champions that are being recommended to you. Some benchmarking of other local authorities was undertaken on that. And for instance, we were able to find that one local authority has 19 elected member champions over a range of subjects. That's not something which we are recommending to you today. I think the risk there would be that there would be duplication with the role of portfolio holders, and my view is that it is better to retain the two that we already have, who are the older persons champion, the veterans champion, and then the two which were recommended to Council in the previous report in December, which were an equality and human rights champion and a young persons champion. And it seems to me that those four which are suggested here have a cross-cutting remit across a range of issues in the Council, which will complement the role of portfolio holders, but won't duplicate the work of those particular portfolio holders. You aren't asked to appoint to those positions today, Provost. This is the last meeting, as we've all noted, of the current Council, and it would, I think, make more sense to appoint those champions in the new meeting in May. So those are the recommendations, Provost, and again, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Go straight to the leader, Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost, and it's good to see this come forward, particularly at this juncture as we finish one council and head into a new council. I think it's been good to see the roles and remits of what one of the would be for the champions to carry out, and a very clear message that it's complementary to the portfolio holders, and would hope that there would be very close working relationships with the portfolio holders. As has been highlighted, the champions have a cross-cutting and therefore would cover more than one portfolio, and we would feed into that process. I think that there's an opportunity for a slightly different tack to be taken, particularly within our communities by the community champions in order to actually engage with the particular area of development. And as a result, I think there's a lot of rich information, detail, perhaps unmet need identified as a result of that. So I'm happy to support that. I think having the four, I think, is probably manageable. See, the areas are areas that link quite nicely to our corporate priorities and going forward, and are reflected within the Falkirk plan, which takes beyond just Falkirk Council but into our community planning remit. The one addition that I would be seeking to perhaps make to that is where we have that the community champions would be providing a report action to council. I would ask that we maybe consider that the report to council a minimum of once a year, and that way there's at least an annual report coming forward on the work that they've been engaged within, and that can then be seen in linking with the portfolio and the policy work that's ongoing. But I'm more than happy to move the report, and we take forward the community champions into the next council and begin to develop the work in the particular areas highlighted.
For your motion. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Provost, and I'm really pleased to see the report come forward, and obviously on the back of the motion brought forward in December Council. It's a really well laid out report, and I agree with the leader of the council in terms of the understanding of the definition of how things would work, how they would complement the portfolio holders. And indeed, I agree with Colin that 19 seems an excessive amount, even if you were in a very large council. But that this in particular will allow us to perhaps plug some of the more traditional or less traditional gaps, and it's mentioned in the report about the underrepresented groups, and how we are, and the whole point of the motion coming forward is that we are not yet at a diverse and inclusive council, and I live in hope that after May the 6th, perhaps we'll have all collectively made progress in that. But it's a long-term endeavour, and that these champions will help to spread that profile, make sure that the voices of those traditionally underrepresented groups are more embedded within the council's policy development process and what's happening. I think it's a really welcome point, that it's just, I know we don't often look at the Section 6 and the implications, but it is pointed out in terms of the risk, that it decreases the risk to the council if our decisions are more diverse and inclusive, and they have been out to all the groups that we represent across our entire council area. So I welcome that mention in the report also, and I hope that when we do come back and appoint these champions, they'll be able to play a really meaningful role. So thanks to Colin for a summary, and also to the author of the report for bringing forward this in such a logical manner. And I would agree with the leader also in moving that we have a way of reporting back that hopefully valuable work annually to the council, so that we can really make it a meaningful role. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you for your input, and I think you're quite right. What the leader has said, that there should be at least an annual report coming back, which would be beneficial to everybody. Okay, I'm going straight to Councillor Kerr. Councillor Kerr, have you got any amendment to the recommendation contained?
No amendment, Provost, but I would like to ask a question to Mr. Moody. What if the champion, whoever it is, doesn't bring a report back? What happens to them?
I think what I would anticipate, just taking into account the leader's adjustment to the report itself, is that there will probably be, I think, annually a point on the council agenda where the reports back will come from the council champions. So I think it would become very obvious to the council if any particular champion wasn't making a report at that time. And then, of course, it would be open, I think, to the council subsequently. Wanted someone else to be the champion. But I don't think other than that, there would be an obvious penalty for someone in that position. I think we don't have a definition of, does it need to be a written report, or does it, for instance, could it be a verbal report to council on that particular item as well? That's something we can give some further thought to in advance of the new council coming into place.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. We're quite happy with the recommendations, Provost, and apart from that, as well as agree the tweak by the leader. 5.3 covers everything that we would like to see in covering the champions. Thank you, Provost.
For your input, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. We agree with recommendations. I was glad to see the young person's champion in there, which is vital that our young people get that representation. When I first read this, I actually thought it was elected members champion, but I can't see anybody taking up that baton. So happy to agree that, and agree with what the leader said, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you for your positive comments. Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Provost. Can I simply say that I welcome the detail of the roles as anticipated, and particularly stress that under 5.3 that the champion will be supported by a lead officer. This I know was the previous practice, but it had rather lapsed over a period, and I think it's correct that this should be stressed as being an important part of the functions of each of the champions.
Very valid point. Councillor Colley, I believe you're wanting in. Councillor Colley.
Yes, thanks, Provost. I just wanted to say a couple of things about how delighted I am for the report to come forward. I've worked in the voluntary sector for many years, and we often talk about hard to reach and underrepresented groups and how we ensure their views are taken into account. But the reality is that these groups are not really hard to reach, but rather that their requirements are really seldom heard and thus less likely to be considered. It's not really meant to be a criticism, it's human nature to reflect what we know and understand, our own experiences and our own needs. I know, for example, I've got a strong affinity for talking about disability, older people and caring. It's part of my life and that of my family, and indeed my work, and it's closely associated with that. We are what we know, and I think it takes a lot of effort to do otherwise, and I think the establishment of the champions will really help bring the needs of these traditionally underrepresented groups or groups are not reflected in the councillor make-up to the fore. And I really want to thank Councillor Murtagh for bringing forward the initial motion to the council. It's helped to bring this action. I did want to say I was particularly pleased to see the proposal for an equalities and human rights champion. Everything we do, including our budget, should be underpinned by ensuring that our decisions do not inadvertently impact negatively on groups with protected characteristics, but that more than that, considering how our investments and policy developments can positively impact on equalities and on the human rights of all our citizens. We know, for example, the pandemic has not impacted on everyone equally, and our response going forward needs to recognise that. There will be different needs in recovery. A clear example will come before us, and I think the champions will be really great in informing this around the proposals for a national care service and whatever we think of what the proposals are. They are underpinned by the idea of delivering human rights for the people who use services, that social care delivers economic, social and cultural rights, not just providing traditional social care. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Falkirk Council have these champions, and the champions making a real difference for our citizens.
Thank you for your input as usual. Councillor McCluckie.
Yes, Provost. I like what I'm hearing today from obviously the speakers about inclusiveness and equalities and that. These are very important things and dear to us all. And that's what the voters out there, the people in the constituents that we represent, look for in a council, is try to be doing our best for them and for all of them, no matter what their age or different other differences we've got. However, I'm a bit concerned that we end up going back down to an issue when people are getting elected, that it becomes a party system where, you know, an administration, or if two groups get together, they appoint, you know, people in for one party and take all. You get 13 champions off of the one group. And that's my concern. When we're truly trying to be equal here, we need to, hopefully the next council that comes up can stop that that practice and try to put the best people in that will do the job for Falkirk, irrespective of their politics.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution, sir. It's an opportunity now for everybody that's had an opportunity.
Just in response to Councillor McCluckie,
right,
could I just point out that the current champions are not held by the administration, and they actually are held by two in each of the opposition groups, or independent by the opposition groups. So it's not along party lines.
Okay, thanks for clarification. Okay, we agree.
The administration put all members.
Councillor McCluckie, I know, we understand your point, and I think it was resolved by the leader there. That's fine, thank you. Has everybody agreed to the recommendation contained within? Agreed. Thank you very much for that. Okay, now item 8, it's the arrangements for carrying out council functions, March to May 2022. The report is by Mr Brian Pirrie, and it's pages 175 to 181. Could I say at this stage that Mr Pirrie has been a long-term servant of this council, and sometimes he doesn't get the recognition that he deserves, but I'll totally give him all the recognition he requires. He's a wonderful officer. Mr Pirrie.
Well, thank you, Provost. I'm not really sure where to go with that, but thank you very much.
You're not retiring. Sorry about that.
Well, I know. Well, it was nice knowing everybody. Thank you. So as members have noted a couple of times today, this is the last meeting of council and the last meeting in the formal programme of meetings ahead of the elections on May the 5th. This is a traditional recess report brought forward a little bit early because of the elections, and also with a few add-ons. So the primary purpose of the report is to ask council to delegate recess powers to officers for the period after today's meeting until the statutory meeting of council on the 25th of May, and that will be subject to the usual caveats and safeguards. The report then goes on to say that the formal meeting programme has closed. There are a couple of meetings that are going to be scheduled for the period between now and the election. These are the Planning Committee, and that's to finish off its business. There's a site visit just taking place, and that will close off that business, and there's going to be an additional meeting of the Civic Licensing Committee. Both meetings will be held in a hybrid way, the way that this meeting is held, with members being able to attend remotely or in person. There's also going to be a final meeting of the Appointments Committee to make its decision on the Director of Transformation, Communities and Corporate Services. So that will close off the Council's formal business before the elections. After the elections, there'll be a statutory meeting of Council. That's a matter of the Chief Executive to determine the date, but in order to assist candidates and to assist services, we're suggesting that the 25th of May is set aside for that date. The report then also goes on to just outline a provisional timetable of meetings for the period after the election up until the summer recess. It's a matter of the next council to decide that, but we find it's helpful to just give an indicative programme at this point. The final part of the report just looks at the training and membership of committees. Obviously, council's previously agreed that membership of certain committees requires members to be trained beforehand, and the report just goes on to say that we're going to look at the whole range of elected member training ahead of the statutory meeting, and there'll be a report going to the meeting at that time on what training is recommended for members. You're probably aware of the fact that there's an elected members questionnaire out just now, and that will help inform the training that's going to be put in place for new members, but also returning members going forward. So with that, I'll conclude, Provost, and just ask members if they can agree the recommendations set out in section 2 of the report.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there are any questions to Brian at this stage. Have we agreed the recommendation? Agreed. Thank you very much. That takes us now to item 9, which is the execution of deeds. It's pages 182 to 184. Mr. Moody, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I'll be very brief. This just gives the usual notification of deeds that have been executed on behalf of the Council, and the Council is asked to note these.
Mr. Moody, could I maybe come in with a question myself? Page 184, for members, that will be the very back page. At the bottom section, it states a notice of potential liability for costs, and what it does, it highlights a number of areas within my ward, and just wanted to know what exactly the situation is regarding this. Thank you.
Well, if I could say, Provost, that these are notices of potential liability for costs, and in general terms, a notice for potential liability for costs is something which can happen following a common repairs scheme carried out under the Tenements Scotland Act. And what it does is it preserves the position of the Council for recovering the costs of undertaking any works under such a scheme. It's a slightly technical issue of the consequence of the notice is that the liability for costs will also lie with any person who buys the property later on, rather than just those who were the owner at the time of the works carried on. So that's the reason for such a notice being placed on the property, Provost.
Thank you. I think that it will blend in with the motion that's coming. Okay, then we're going to item 10, which is motions now. These two motions that are coming forward would have been referred to the executive, but after discussion with the leader and the group leaders, obviously this is the last meeting of the council, so I've referred them to this council meeting. So the first notice of motion is by, I think it's Councillor Nimmo. Aitchison, is it Aitchison? Yep, Councillor Aitchison.
As indeed, Provost, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't want to say a great deal on this. I think the motion's quite self-explanatory. I do find it quite bizarre that an organisation carries out a business plan and a organisational restructuring just shortly before it's taken over. perhaps I'm being cynical, but maybe it's the Scottish Government getting other people to do their dirty work before they take over ScotRail. They are going to cut the rail services down. There's 250 less services a day across Scotland, and there's going to be staffing at 117 stations will be affected, including Falkirk, Grahamston, Bowman, Linlithgow, which does cover Bowness. And there's also be cuts at Falkirk High. Falkirk, Grahamston and Bowman can see some staffing cuts up to 30%. That causes quite a lot of complications for disabled people. Quite interesting hearing about the equalities champion, because this kind of flies in the face of what we're trying to achieve with the equalities champion. Disabled people will have difficulties working machines, perhaps getting on and off trains, accessing in and out stations. So therefore they may not go, they may not travel if they're travelling alone, which they have every right to travel alone. It causes a lot of inequalities through society. So I think it probably causes isolation, causing them to stay at home. So I think that's a huge issue. Excuse me. There's also an issue with lone travellers working, and particularly female and elderly people. These cuts will be planned for basically after 7:30 in the evening. So it's not a great time for lone people to travel in and out of railway stations. It causes a lot of safety implications. Again, so people may not go through the railways and they may not go out socially, so again causing isolation. And finally, following the carbon emissions and things, if people don't feel safe using the railways, they'll just go back to using a car if they have that provision available. They'll just keep using the roads, which all flies in the face of what the Scottish Government are trying to do. So I'd like to ask the Leader of the Council to write to the First Minister and to the Transport Minister, basically saying that this move to cut the staffing and things at the railway stations isn't any part in a progressive society, and I would ask them to rethink their decisions. Thank you.
Have you got a seconder for this motion?
Yeah, I'll second that, Provost, and reserve right to come back in.
Okay. You've heard the motion, you've read it, you've had the agenda for some time. Who want to come? I'll go to the leader. Councillor Garner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Provost. We, the SNP administration, welcomes the return of ScotRail to public sector, considers the new public sector operator to be critical in securing green, affordable, accessible and reliable rail services for Scotland's passengers. Notes the vital role that ScotRail staff and workers will play in delivering these new services. Notes that staff will transfer their current terms and conditions, will benefit from public sector pay policy. Further welcomes the investment by Scottish Government to decarbonise and expand Scotland's railways, including £1 billion to electrify 441 kilometres of track and improve infrastructure, benefiting more than 35 million passengers' journeys across Scotland each year. A record of £4.85 billion allocated, including ongoing electrification and decarbonisation. Over £9 billion of investment by the Scottish Government since 2007, helping to reconnect 14 communities to the rail network, with more being looked at. A message I received from Brian Deacon, Chairman of RBRS, the Reinstate Bonnybridge Railway Station. With the Scottish Government's plans to reach net zero emissions by 2045, looking at public transport that can help reach this target is a priority. The recent report by Rail Future Scotland yet again shows the need for a station in Bonnybridge. This clearly demonstrates that our campaign is being substantiated, and we look forward to working with Rail Future, and we thank the Scottish Government, Falkirk Council and the public in our campaign to help bring a station back to Bonnybridge. This report also mentions Grangemouth, covered, as we know, by our investment zone. Welcomes that rail fares in Scotland are still on average 20% lower than across the rest of Great Britain, and that from May there will be 150 more rail services than there have been running since December 2021. We're obviously in the middle of a pandemic. with 25 services being reintroduced following the recent consultation on timetable changes with some 3,500 responses. Recognises that there has been widespread public and stakeholder interest in ScotRail consultation on ticket office availability, but notes that the consultation only closed this month and responses are therefore still to be reviewed. Further notes that the fares review will explore what more can be done to ensure that fares across all modes of public transport are equitable and sustainable. Agrees that the culture of ScotRail Trains Limited will be founded on fair work, recognises the key role that publicly owned and controlled rail service will play in the future to help transform Scotland's economy, to cut emissions from transport, deliver on climate change targets and create a fairer, greener Scotland. Regardless of what happens, there will be passenger assist. This should still be bookable in the same way and across normal websites, apps or numbers. MACS, Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, they advise Scottish Government Ministers in Transport Scotland and Disabled Access, will continue to assist during the transition from April 2022. With this in mind, Provost, I have an amendment, and I think it's been circulated just now by email, and we have paper copies for people in here, and I'll just read out the amendment just now. Council asks the Leader of Falkirk Council, Cecil Meekerjohn, to write to the UK Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Sharps, calling for full devolution of rail from UK Government in order to operate a wholly publicly owned, fully integrated rail network in Scotland. Thank you, Provost.
I'm happy to second, Provost, and reserve the right.
Okay, we'll take a few minutes to look at the amendment as everybody's getting a copy. And is Mr. Perry, is it going on screen for the members that are remote? Thank you very much. I'm going to ask at this stage, would any of the groups like a short recess to discuss with members? You would?
I think that'd only be appropriate.
Well, that's 20 past. 10 minutes, would that be suffice? Back for 10:30 or 11:30? 12:30. No, I'm looking at the clock there.
Remember, the clocks went for it on Sunday.
I forgot that. Okay, just where we are, we have a motion moved and seconded, and we also have an amendment moved and seconded. I'm going to come to Councillor Kerr after recess. Have you got a further amendment?
No further amendments.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, we're going to open it up for debate now. You've heard the motion, you've heard the amendment. Open it up for general debate.
Thanks, Provost. Councillor Garner's amendment doesn't address Councillor Richardson's motion. It didn't tackle the reduction in numbers at stations and disability and women turning up at the station with nowhere to go, equality issues, lone travellers. So there's so many issues that Councillor Richardson raised, and quite rightly so, but Councillor Garner never really tackled that. Instead, he kind of made some cheap constitutional points, and is he really seriously proposing that the rail line stops at Gretna, that's English, and then the next one is Scottish? So I think it's just another independence, constitutional punt, if you like. So really, it never addressed the main issues that Councillor Richardson put forward. And I think we'll just stick to our proposals, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you for your input.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I would just like to say again, in the motion that Councillor Aitchison put up, there's no mention of anything about the stations. It was about cutbacks in stations exactly, rather than we mentioned Councillor Gardner mentioned Bonnybridge railway station, and there's nothing in the motion precluding or continuing pressure to reopen Bonnybridge railway station, because we wholeheartedly support that. So I was just a bit confused there, because that's nothing to do with the motion. Thanks, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other person wanting input? Councillor McCluckie and your good self. We'll take Councillor McCluckie. I think he's been waiting for 20 minutes.
20 minutes,
Right.
Provost, as always. And well, what we see is that earlier on the day we were on, Provost, about working differently with the council. And what we've got here again is we've got a Labour motion, a very good motion up, that all the Labour Party will support because they're members of the Labour group. And obviously, because it's criticising the SNP government, or the SNP come up with an amendment and didn't refer to it, and they vote. And at the end of the day, we'll wait and see what the Conservatives do, and that'll decide what way it goes. I'm not a party a group, so I can support or no support a group, and I'm supporting this because Councillor Aitchison's motion is a very good motion here. This is about cutting services, and I'm glad I went and got road tax again for my big diesel motor, because what we're seeing again is 250 rail services cut across Falkirk, cutting in staff at all the local train stations. And the bit about saying you can phone up and get arranged to get somebody at the other end to get off is a load of rubbish, because all we need to do is, if we all go on a train and every one of us phones up and says, right, we want somebody at the other end, then they'll have to man them. But what happens even at the moment is they tell you to take a later train when somebody will be there, or whatever, or take an earlier train, and they try to get you off that way. And that's with the staff we've got at present. What we're seeing here is worded very well. Lone travellers, especially females, less trains means bigger delays in standing at a train station, isolated. Disabled people can't get about. And we're talking about we should be using climate change as an example in everything. We just seen in the budgets recently where that's one thing about me, I'm consistent. 100,000 off of the bus subsidies, right? And how it's got to be funded is we're going to take Sunday buses off. That's what the director says, the only way it can be funded. So folks going to be isolated in the villages, stuck here, can't get in with a bus pass that's not good to you, no buses running. And this is what's going to be happening with cutting train services. And then we'll tell you about climate change, and we get Councillor Gardner with his grand political speech there for the thing, instead of dealing with the relevant facts. And the fact says that this is a good motion here. We should be fighting these cuts to staffing and try to encourage more people to go on the trains and help the climate, and try to help with more buses as well for people. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Any other member? Councillor Meikle-John, and then Councillor Alexander. Councillor Meikle-John.
Okay, thank you, Provost. Disappointing, I mean, some of the comments that have been made, because this is an opportunist motion that's been brought forward. Because as Councillor Gardner clearly indicated, there's a consultation process and it's not completed yet. So we've got people that are determining the outcome before we've actually got the facts before us. But one of the key facts is that the rail services are not fully devolved. And without having that fully devolved, then Scottish Government in renationalising the rail services don't have all the levers or the economic levers that can make the difference. And that's the fundamental aspect that is being overlooked by the Labour group in putting forward this motion and seeking to criticise the SNP government. What they are forgetting is the whole transformation programme, and actually the consultation talks about more digitisation. We've seen particularly over COVID, the fact that more people are doing things online, And as a council, we are transforming because more people are doing things online. Therefore, other services are doing likewise. And if they've not got the footfall through their ticket offices, then under best value, they have to relook at that. And that's exactly what's happening here. Safety can be improved in other ways. And again, by having the ability to invest in the stations with CCTV, linking them up, as they could do in Falkirk to our own hub with the police, etc., then there's opportunities there for that to be extended. And at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is be responsive to the customer needs. I'm going to talk a wee bit about the passenger assist. Having sat for 5 years on the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, I know the huge amount of work that goes on within that committee, and there's about 80 to 90% who are all disabled travellers. And they have the interest of making sure that disabled people have the best possible service. And that's where the passenger assist service came from. And it's quite clear that Councillor McClucky's not had the experience of the passenger assist service, because it is very good and it is responsive to people's needs. And should they not be able to get, because of access issues to the station they want to, arrangements will be made to assist them in order to get to where they need to be. And the disabled travellers know that service is available to them, and what's needed in order to make sure that they can facilitate that service. And perhaps it's a fact, just lack of knowledge and the ability to be able to access that will continue, and that there's not considered to be any change to that. But throughout this process, the interests of disabled communities will be represented directly to the Minister through the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, and taking up any issues that do arise in the course of the transition. But it's not anticipated that that will be a detriment to the service. In fact, it hopes that it will be improved. So I think, when we speak from areas of knowledge and expertise, then that has to be accepted. But at the end of the day, we have to look at improvements. And again, the pandemic has caused a number of services to be reduced or not used, again, because of the passenger numbers. That will change as time moves on and people have more confidence in getting out and about. And we have to have a rail service that's able to adapt to that. But in order to get that investment, there has to be some positive changes in the way that people have changed moving around Scotland and indeed beyond. But by writing to the First Minister, whose hands are tied, and much of this is not going to achieve the outcome that anybody is looking for, least of all this particular motion. We need to go to the crux of where things are and ask the UK Government to devolve the rail services fully.
19.1, Provost.
What's your 19.1?
19.1, there's a name there, and taking out of context what I said, and I would like to clarify it.
What's the clarification?
The clarification is that said that I don't know anything about the disabled issues. I was a member of a local disabled group for about 10 years, as I say, the Falkirk wide. Obviously, my local constituent here, Henry Sherlock, is on that disabled group. A blind constituent, and I listen earnestly to him and all the other disabled people. I've also witnessed all the people phone getting off the trains as it is because of the height and difficulties, and I'm, as I say, go boot in a stick and got disability myself. So as I say, to say that I don't know the issues faced by disabled people, I like to back, Provost, because that is totally incorrect.
That wasn't said. That wasn't what it was said. Okay.
Was I reckon the was confused?
Right. Okay. Thank you, sir. Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, Convener, I quite enjoyed the debate. I quite enjoyed David's contribution in terms of bringing the motion forward. I don't know why he has done it more often, but that's better late than never. The fact is that we'll have to look at the map of the UK to see where the problem is, the problem lies in relation to rail services divided amongst. It's not true to say that the Scottish Government are responsible for aspects of the rail service that has been intimated by all the other speakers so far. And so I'm hopeful. And, there's nothing wrong with it, knock about stuff. I can't remember who said that we're quoting or re-quoting the issue of the issue of transparency and of joint work together within the council. There's no problem with having a bit knock about. Within that, it's perfectly legitimate to have to have that level of scrutiny, that level of counterproductive, counter argument, and so don't get too uptight in that. But you're wrong in terms of the emotion, and you're wrong in the claim that Gardner has faithfully answered the points. He answers the points that are relevant to the majority of people who travel by train, and that is obvious. I think I'll indicate that time's up. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you for your input, Councillor Alexander. It's Councillor Nimmo followed by Councillor Blackwood. Councillor Nimmo.
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost, and I'll try and be as quick as possible so it'll not take up too much time. The SNP here are nothing but consistent. They take no responsibility for the real issues that are affecting people of Falkirk, and that's pretty evident by the amendment that's just been put forward. The Scottish Railway is not a constitutional issue, as the SNP would have you believe. ScotRail, I believe, is controlled by the government. It's just another failed attempt to detract for the SNP's failure to prioritise the rail service here in Scotland. It's the public that will suffer at the end of the day, and it's the public that will pay the price for their inaction and failure. I think the amendment was just a total and utter disgrace. Thanks, Provost.
Councillor Blackwood.
Thanks, thanks, Provost. Provost, what I fail to understand here is why is ScotRail making these cuts to services and staff in the full knowledge that the Scottish Government are taking over a service? Surely if there's to be reductions in services and staff, it should be a Scottish Government decision after the takeover of the service.
That seems a valid point to me, but I don't know if anybody can come in and answer that. We've nobody here for ScotRail or the government. Go back to you, Councillor Gardner, in relation to that question. Can you maybe give us any input into it?
No, what I don't know is I don't know where Labour's got their figures from.
Right.
That they're coming up with now, considering it is still under.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That I was going to ask. I got an answer for you, Councillor Blackwood. So I'm going to go back now to Councillor Aitchison to wind up. Councillor Aitchison. Councillor
I had my light on. Sorry.
Fine, sir.
For start off, it's a Bellio. Keep saying ScotRail. It's a Bellio. It's not ScotRail. If there's any decisions that are being made here, it's by the franchise owner. As Councillor Garner has said, he doubts the actual figures that are there, but ultimately they are the franchise owner at this moment in time. I think what the suggestion that this is to do with independence, which I wholeheartedly agree that with independence for my country, this is about devolution. This is about devolving, not about independence. Although I will be quite happy to accept independence, and it won't be a problem then. But this is if you read actually what Paul has written, it's about devolving the whole ScotRail franchise, so that Scottish Government can work better with it. That's what he's asking for. He's not asking for anything else.
Councillor Aitchison, would you like to wind up?
Yeah, some of the issues here, and so I don't know if you can make me or not.
We can hear you.
That's fine. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I put the motion forward. What I heard was nothing more than constitutional rhetoric, as far as I'm concerned. It didn't address any of the issues about people with disability, low travellers, inaccessible railway stations and things like that. So I'm quite happy to keep it as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to say, before we go to the vote, I thought the presentation for yourself and the information contained within your motion was very, very good. Also thought that the presentation in summary by Councillor Gardner as well was very good. He did mention, as Councillor Grant had said on a number of occasions, about the council and the proactiveness of the community there to try and get the railway station reopened. And this council, over all the years that I've been here, which is will be 30, have tried with petitions, whatever, and they've safeguarded the site at Bonnybridge for some considerable years. And the commitment is there, and hopefully in the next council, whoever's on it, hopefully they'll ensure that the commitment for Bonnybridge railway station to be reopened will still be there, because the community deserves it. It's, as Councillor Gardner knows very well, there used to be a railway station in Denny, there was one in Banknock, there was one in Denland Head. There were 4 railway stations in Bonnybridge, and hopefully as time goes on, that we'll see the reinstatement of the station there. Other than that, straight to you, Mr Moody, for the vote. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Provost. And the motion is moved by Councillor Aitchison and seconded by Councillor Bissett, against which there is an amendment moved by Councillor Garner and seconded by Councillor Meiklejohn. Provost Buchanan. Motion. Deputy Provost Ritchie.
Motion.
Councillor Aitchison.
Motion.
Councillor Alexander.
Amendment.
Councillor Balfour.
Amendment.
Councillor Binney. Councillor Bissett. Councillor Blackwood.
Motion.
Councillor Bowes.
Amendment.
Councillor Colley.
Motion. Sorry, amendment.
Thank you. Just to clarify, that is for the amendment. Councillor Coombs.
For the motion.
Councillor Flynn.
For the motion.
Councillor Garner.
For the amendment.
Councillor Grant.
The motion.
Councillor Harris.
The motion.
Councillor Hughes. Councillor Kerr.
The motion.
Councillor McHugh. Councillor McCluckie.
Motion.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
For the amendment.
Councillor Munro.
The motion.
Thank you. Councillor Murtagh.
The amendment.
Councillor Nicholl.
Provost, I had some urgent business to attend to during that debate, so in the interest of fairness, I intend to abstain.
Councillor Nimmo.
Motion.
Councillor Patrick. Councillor Russell. And Councillor Spears.
Amendment.
Okay. Provost, there are 14 votes for the motion. There are 12 votes for the amendment. 1 abstention. The motion is accordingly carried.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm with you all at the moment. We've been here for 3 hours. It's 1 o'clock, I believe, according to that clock. It's 12, but it's 1 o'clock. The fact of the matter is we've got a motion coming up. It could take maybe quite a bit of debate. So the lunch has been ready since 12 o'clock. So I think that we should go down and get the lunch just now while it's still warm, and then come back in half an hour. Would that be okay with everybody? Everybody happy with that? Right. Will you want to continue? Continue for you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, then. That's fine. Thank you. I'll just get my paperwork. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for officers for their deliberations. This motion was put forward by myself. It's in relation to communal repairs. Now, I'm just going to give you a bit of background for a few minutes. I could actually sit here for a couple of hours and talk about this, but in 2017, we had a rough casting and re-roofing contract in Bonnybridge. So that was 2017. During that period of time, myself and Councillor Grant were called in by residents because of the fact that, first of all, they were unhappy that some of them felt that they didn't want to take part, and they were getting forced into this issue. Now, at that particular time, we called a few public meetings in the community centre, and at one of the public meetings, they invited Councillor Harris's wife, who was an MSP at the time, to come. One of the issues at that particular time was that in the correspondence they had received, there was a notice that stated that there was an opportunity, if they didn't want to take part in this contract, to opt out. And I think that Councillor Harris's wife took it to the Scottish Parliament. But the fact of the matter is that suddenly, after sort of, I would say maybe about 2 months, we had meetings maybe every 2 or 3 weeks to see where we were going. It suddenly just, we heard nothing. Now, I never heard another word about it until probably 2 months before Christmas, when I bumped into somebody, that one of the people that lived in the flats, it's the flats in the High Street in Bonnybridge, who told me that he was really upset because he had received this letter in for the council asking him for £12,000. Now, it seemed to be at that particular time, Councillor Kerr and myself, we called another meeting, and we invited the other local councillor, Councillor Coleman, to come as well. And we had another meeting in the community centre. And I've got to say this at the very beginning, that although it was 4 years before they got the bills in, the fact is that there's no dubiety about the fact that these people have got to pay. But the fact is that after 4 years, they were getting these letters in that stated that they needed to pay £12,000, and there was an opportunity there for talk to people for the council about repayment, etc. So we had a few meetings, and I've got to say this, that our distinguished colleague to the right, Councillor Meiklejohn, spoke to Councillor Kerr and myself with Kenny Gillespie.
Councillor Grant.
Councillor Grant and myself.
I wasn't there.
That's it. Councillor Grant and myself had a meeting with Councillor Meiklejohn, and at the end of it, it's still, the situation was still the same. Members of that area, who are residents of the area, were absolutely distraught that suddenly they were getting these letters in for the council. And what happened was, we had heard that there was a similar situation had developed in the high flats, and it was, we classified it as option 4. And option 4 would be that the people that were in this position and were put under a lot of pressure to pay money had an opportunity to enter into an agreement with the council, whether they would sign an agreement to say that if they pass on, then the house was sold, then the repayment would come back for the council, or if they sold the house on. And that was the situation. The fact of the matter is that every single one of the people that we have been talking to in the past, I think there's maybe down to 9 or 10 now, because I think 2 have actually started a repayment programme, they're actually distraught with the fact is that they're in a position and have been in a position since, say, just before Christmas, that they're getting pressured. And the fact is, that is the word for it, to pay this kind of money. What we are saying in the, and what I'm saying in this notice of motion, and I'll just read it out. The concerns of some of my constituents asked to pay large bill following common repairs where the council is also an owner, and that these repairs take place across the district, that these large bills can be difficult to pay for some owners, particularly when they are retired, they're old, elderly people, that the options currently provided for in the scheme of assistance do not include the option to defer payment, example, through a charging order to the point where the property is sold or the owner passes on. That's the main thrust of this notice of motion. We feel, because we've already been speaking to them at some considerable length, we've seen how distraught they are. And the fact of the matter is that we understand there is an obligation for these people, whether they wanted to take part in that contract or no, that they have got a responsibility to pay the council. Now, if you take it at, say, £11,000 or £12,000, there's 10 or 12 people, that's an awful lot of money for the council. We're no disputing that. But the fact is, what I would like to see is, I would like to see this option or clause 4 or whatever they call it, which has already been used. There's been a precedent set in the high flats, that they be given an opportunity now to sign an agreement to say that they will pay, the money will be taken back to the council when either they pass on or they sold the house. So I would formally move the motion contained within the report.
Yeah, I'll second that, Provost. Also, apologies.
Thanks, Councillor President. Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to echo everything you say, and I would like to second it, because it has been used before, as you say, under clause 4 or option 4 in the high flats, whereas they had the option to pay when the properties are sold. So I'd like them to review it for the occupiers of the flats in Bonnybridge. Thanks, Provost.
Who would like to come in at this stage? Councillor Hughes, portfolio holder for housing. Thank you, sir.
I certainly am not putting forward an amendment or a counter motion to yours, Provost. I just was wondering if I could ask a number of questions. Oh, right, thank you. Thank you very much. I was really just clarification of the current situation. Can I just say that I understand, you know, currently with the cost of living rocketing, energy costs, material costs, fuel poverty, and bills in general are rocketing at the moment, and I do understand the context of why you've put forward the motion, and it is a very topical in that respect. But could I just ask, in relation, may I ask the acting director of housing, if that's okay with yourself? I always like to get guidance from yourself, Provost.
SB.
Provost, yes, I'm on the call, Provost.
Had the question from.
Well, I haven't asked the question yet.
Well, in fact, no. The question was, are you on the call and you just answered it? Fine, carry on, Gordon.
I was just wondering, Mr. Gillespie, in relation to the scheme of assistance, does the scheme of assistance, I mean, is it obviously bounded by legislation in that money or resources comes from the Scottish Government in relation to the scheme of assistance, and that then comes under, say, the private sector housing? My second question is in relation to the housing revenue account. Does the housing revenue account cover owner-occupiers? And I'll just ask you those two questions first, and then I have a question after that, if I may, Provost.
Provost, I'm happy to answer the question through yourself, if that's okay. Okay, thanks, Provost. Sorry, I'm finding it difficult to hear you there. On the back of the first question asked by Councillor Hughes, just to give a bit of context, originally we had the repair grant which sat under the Housing Act of Scotland of 1987, and that was was provided by Scottish Government, and it was ring-fenced for grants, and that would have been at the time about the high-rise flats that was referred to earlier in the Provost motion. That then changed, and that changed to the scheme of assistance which you just spoke about, which was introduced under the Housing Act 2006. Now, these monies that are provided for the scheme of assistance fall under your general fund monies, which obviously is not your HRA. So yes, it does come under the private sector, but it comes under the council's remit of general fund money. You asked the other question about, I think there, Councillor Hughes, in regards to HRA monies. That is not for owners, that is only for our council tenants. And it's their right to decide where they want their money to spend. And that's why we do the consultation, obviously, with the capital programme and with the rents as well, Councillor.
Could I just ask a couple of supplementaries?
Certainly.
I always like to get your guidance, Provost. Mr Gillespie, in relation to the capital grant, I take it that that amount of money which is put into the general grant funding, that it's limited in the amount of money that the council gets?
That's correct, Councillor. The council to decide how much money they want to put into that scheme of assistance, which comes from the government.
Right. And can I ask you, in terms of the Tenement Act, you've mentioned, obviously, the scheme of assistance. Does the Tenement Act cover the scheme of assistance? And in terms, and obviously, where owner-occupiers are concerned, is there a consultation process with the owner-occupiers, and where, obviously, where the council is in the majority of owners, owns a number of flats in relation to the majority, is there a consultation process which includes the owner-occupiers? And in terms of legislation, does the council have an authority to, shall we say, instruct owner-occupiers to carry out repairs?
I'll try my best to answer all these questions there, Councillor. Two or three things. So this falls under the Housing Tenement Act, and what happens is when there is any repairs required, then there is a process that we follow, and it's quite a rigorous process, and that means that we contact obviously any owners that are in a communal repair. That's then voted on, and the majority would then rule to take that forward. However, the council can instigate that, but any owner-occupier can instigate that repair or upgrade themselves as well. And the council has been in situations where it has been a minority and the private owners have managed to get their own contractors to carry out repairs, and the council was then required under the Tenement Act to provide that money and pay for any repairs done. Subsequently, if owners dispute any part of the process, there is a requirement they can appeal that and go to the sheriff in any of these times, and that would be heard by a sheriff if there was any dubiety about the process that was followed. Councillor.
Thank you. I've just one last question. Obviously, in relation to the HRA on the one hand, the grant on the scheme of assistance on the other, if obviously the funding in terms of the scheme of assistance obviously is limited in what it can do, in terms of finance, in terms of the financial or the finance section, I'm thinking about probably Mr. Smale in this regard, if that's okay with you, Provost. In relation to borrowing in terms of the general fund, would the strategy in relation to financial sustainability be invoked? Because we've obviously talked this morning about operational boundaries and the authorization limit for external debt. So would there be a realistic, shall we say, consideration of liability and risk in relation to any, shall we say, amount of money that would, in terms of this motion, it would appear that it's rather open-ended. So in terms of the general fund, would the council be looking to restrict in terms in terms of the borrowing requirement, if we went down that route?
Right, Mr. Smale coming in here.
Sorry, Provost, I was just waiting for your formal in there. I think there's maybe a couple of points there. In principle, I think what Councillor Hughes is saying has validity, but I think two factors would be particularly relevant. One is that of scale, and I don't think the implications of this would be of a magnitude that would jeopardize the broader considerations that we touched on earlier on the Treasury report. And I suppose linked to that, you may recall that in the report there effectively was two levels, an approved level and an authorised level. One level said at the best estimate of how we think things will pan out, but there's a safety net built in where there's a higher level, and we always build a big margin in just to take on board things that happen in the real world, that come in maybe from left field somewhat. I think the other point I would make is around, and again we touched on it earlier in terms of the potential code. To the extent that ultimately the debt is repaid, i.e. it's covered, one can quite readily in those terms argue that in its own right it's prudential borrowing. Okay, you're advancing, but you are at the end of the day covering it. So that would be my observations, Provost.
Thank you, Provost.
No, thank you. They were very worthwhile questions, and so was the answer coming from Mr. Smale. Councillor Meikle-John.
Okay, thank you, Provost. And I'm going to say that I'm not adverse. I think that might be helpful to just clarify that, because I think there's huge implications for this. 2017 was one of the first things that the SNP administration did, was review the scheme of assistance and look at the flexibility, recognising that there was large costs to some owner occupiers around our improvement programme, and that brought in additional options to help, but it still left the responsibility with the owner occupiers to pay. And I think you've acknowledged that yourself, that there is still the need for the owner occupiers to pay. The scheme around the high flat was particularly relating to the overcladding within the high flats and the high costs related to that, which were quite excessive. However, what's being proposed here is talking about an exception that could be challenged by every other part Falkirk Council area within the owner occupiers, and as such they would have to extend the same opportunities to anyone who's in that position, and that will then put significant pressures on our general fund or indeed our borrowing. And we've just heard earlier on today around the capital borrowing and the pressures that we have. It would also be an unquantified account, that we would have to be able to respond to, making it very challenging financially to manage going forward, and huge risks and liability and a debt that the council would probably have to carry for a significant period of time, that will have a implication on other parts of our business. So I think while it is laudable to be able to look to provide this type of facility to owner occupiers, the reality of being able to actually deliver on it and not impact on other parts of the council could be very, very challenging. You know, as I say, I think we need to really think about the risks associated with it, and therefore happy that a report comes back. But it's something that we do have to think carefully about. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you for your input. Councillor Blackwood, followed by Councillor McCluckie. Councillor Blackwood.
Thanks, Provost. And just following on to Councillor Meikle-John, she said the fact situation was an exceptional situation, but in legal terms, can this be precedent being set? Can it be challenged? What's the likelihood of success in a challenge?
Well, I think as Mr Gillespie explained, the high flats, I think, were some years ago, and that doesn't set a precedent that requires to be followed in every case afterwards. Since the high flat situation, the council has adopted 2 schemes of assistance which set out in clear terms how we would approach such support to owners, and that's how it generally applies across the whole of the council area. And what I think the Provost's motion is asking you to do here is not to take a decision today, but simply to get a report back on whether it would be an option to review the scheme to allow the particular provision that was in place for the high flats to be incorporated within the scheme. And we don't have that report yet. And if the motion is successful today and there's no amendment being moved, there will be a report back in due course which will set out what options are available. And it will also, I think, importantly set out what the financial implications of that would be. So I think that would allow the council to take a fully informed position at that point.
Councillor McCluckie.
Thanks, Provost. I like to agree with your motion, and it's good. And we've heard a bit more information today, which is also good, Provost. I was always concerned with the issue before when grants were available to private householders, because what used to happen was a certain amount of money was made at one time, you could get your roof done. But the crazy thing was you could get a new roof and get your chimney took down or sort your chimney, but you couldn't get a grant just for the chimney. It just seemed absurd, right, the way it used to work. And then the money used to run out after the first couple of months, but and then it maybe wasn't coming through for the next couple of years, and then you got it in a way again. So it's always been a strange one. And it's the same way as the new with bills for, as I say, chimneys, as folk was getting rid of their chimneys and were ready to fall down. The council issue that in case if it's partly owned, the chimney, or a house by the council, then the council inspector might want to go up. It doesn't usually go up, but it might want to go up. So you've got to pay a couple of grand for a scaffold, and then get the job done, which is usually £2,500 to £3,000 altogether, when somebody can do it with a roof ladder if the inspector was obviously allowing it. But these are all issues, and I've had many constitutions like yourself, Provost, where people have been in a block of flats or 4 properties, one's private tenant or 2's private tenant and 2 council, and then they get this huge bill. And it always seemed unfair to me that the folk in the high flats got an exemption, and these other people, these other elderly people out in my villages didn't get the same chances. So I think your motion is great to get this looked at. I think further information needs to be gathered, the implications and what amounts, and what would qualify and what wouldn't qualify in that. So we need to get a bit more background. I'm sure Kenny can get that for us. and then come back to the new council and get dealt with. But it's a very good motion to bring forward some that, as I says, you know, I thought we'd bring it forward 15 years ago. So I'm glad that you have done so, new Provost. And also thank you for allowing me to finish this time, because whether I was in the Labour group or independent, you always get me to sit down quick, usually you get me. But thanks very much.
Well, you're sitting anyway, so I can't ask you to sit down. Right. Thank you very much for your input. Okay, is there anybody else would like to take part, or can Councillor Alexander?
Brian, did you have you a ballpark figure as to the cost of this?
Brian Smail, Brian, question for Councillor Alexander, your ballpark figure he's asking.
I suppose our standard rule of thumb to help inform indicative position is a revenue cost of 50,000 per million. So depending on what the sum here would be, you know, if it was 100,000, then it would be a tenth of 50,000, would be 5,000 a year. But again, it would depend on the interest rate you were using and the period of the loan. But that maybe helpfully gives you a ballpark. But as Mr. Moody has already said, if the motion was approved, a report back covering all the angles would allow the thing to be reviewed in the round with all the relevant factors and considerations on the table in the report.
Thank you. Would Mr. Gillespie want to come in? I'll bring him in as well for you, Councillor Alexander. You anything to add to that, to Councillor Alexander's question, Mr. Gillespie?
Provost, I think Brian covered that very well in regards to what's to cover. And I think the report will look at all the different angles in regards to the private owners, Provost.
Yeah, appreciate that. So, Kenny and Brian, the fact that the private reside within the properties that is unique flats. It's a simple scaffolding. So pointing that out.
Provost, I'm sorry, but I can't hear a word that's being said.
You regret that, Alan? Yeah.
That's better, David.
I say that this was never regarded as an exemption and shouldn't be regarded as an exemption for the private sector. It's something that was unique to the high flats simply because of the height of the high flats. To take scaffolding, for example, a basic tool in this, you want to look at the difference between scaffolding and a 400 block scaffolding costs for the high flats. So, and you know, to come along today, and this is what we'll talk about earlier on, about maturity and about working together. You know, this has been developed over a period of time, a relatively short period of time, with officers, but it's very clear that it hasn't been so. And you know, that's a wee bit of worry. We're still at the stage where we can continue to increase revenue costs, then you know we're very quickly run into more severe problems than those that we've had before. And that's something we want to avoid, because I thought we want to avoid.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. Is Councillor Binney want to come in? Thank you.
I hope you don't mind.
No, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, thank you. The scheme of assistance, what I would like to clarify, is it got a threshold? I mean, what we're talking about is large bills, but what's going to happen because the cost of living, a lot of people You know, it might be a smaller bill that they might have and they might not be able to afford that. So when the report comes back, can it look at that aspect as well? Because I need to know the threshold as well. If there is going to be a scheme of assistance, and it's not really, it's quite vague. It just says large bills, thousands of pounds. So we need that established, because at the end of the day, it is all about money. So it would be good if we could get that in a report, I think, as well. Thank you.
Good point. Anybody else like to give in while I wind up quickly? Okay.
Provost, sorry.
Councillor.
That's all right. On you go.
Okay, thank you very much for listening to the debate. The problem that I've got, but the problem that my constituents have got, is the fact is that they're still getting demand letters in for the council. And just a couple of weeks ago, they were showing us letters they were getting for Adamson's. Now, when you get sheriff officers' letters coming in, that's a really serious issue. I know that we can't today guarantee that these people will be able to go into option 4 or clause 4, whatever you want to call it. But the main fact about bringing this forward was the fact is that these people are under considerable pressure. We've saw it, we've spoken to them, and I thought maybe somebody would ask the question, why are you waiting 4 years? Well, the fact of the matter is that we were involved in 2017. Then they went to other councillors at the time, and the fact is that we've got correspondence that high that people have been sending in for all that period of time. And the problem was that way back at the executive in 2017, they were being told that there was the motion going to the executive in 2017 that would bring this proposal forward, and they would be allowed to go into class 4 or clause 4 or option 4. But the fact is, at the end of it, I'm delighted that you have been sitting here listening, and I'm hopefully you're going to support this motion by myself and Councillor Grant. The issue that we've got is we've got to go back to these constituency hours, and maybe, as I said originally, Councillor Meiklejohn, I'll give Councillor Meiklejohn 100%, and Kenny Gillespie. They sat down with Councillor Grant and me, and they listened intently to what we had to say, and we had people sitting out there waiting on us coming back to say, well, what's happening? Are you getting this? So what we'll need to do is, if you agree this motion, then as far as myself and Councillor Grant goes, and the other councillor for the area, or the new councillors coming in, they'll need to have direct dialogue with these people, because there's 9 or 10 people sitting just now with letters for the council saying that they want 11 or 12,000 pounds off them. They've not got it, and as Councillor Binney said quite rightly, we're going into a situation where there's going to be 500 or 700% going on your electricity bills. Food prices are going up, everything's going up, and the fact is that this is a major worry. But other than that, I'm very content that you've all listened and took part in which I thought was a major issue. And as Councillor Meiklejohn says, if this rolls out and it becomes wider, then at the end of the day, the cost implications could be quite severe in the council. But at the end of it, this was about our issue. And by the way, can I say this, because this is my last time as a provost in Falkirk Council. And first of all, it's been a great honour and a great privilege, and thank you very much. But this isn't a political stunt. We got these people coming to our doors just before Christmas, and since then we've been trying through Kenny Gillespie, through Councillor Meiklejohn, trying to resolve the issue to make sure that they hadn't this continuous worry. So other than that, thank you very much. We'll go to the vote. If there's any vote, there's no amendment. So everybody agreed to the motion? Agreed. Okay. Agreed. Before we go down, first again, that there's a number of councillors that are going to be leaving. We don't really know who, because the list will only be finalised until later on today. As the provost have already stated, it's been a wonderful opportunity for me. Okay, the COVID's been there, but it's been an honour and a privilege to be your provost. And I will always give thanks to everybody that's been here, and I hope that I've been trying to be as fair and as proper as possible. There's a lot of councillors that are leaving, and I've got the greatest respect for them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass on, first of all, to the leader, and then I'll go to the leader of each group, who will speak independently about the wonderful colleagues that they've had. Councillor Meiklejohn.
Thank you, Provost. And it is the last council meeting, and I would just like to give my thanks to all the officers, but all the members of the council, and pay tribute to all those that have served over the last 5 years, having put themselves forward for public office, and given their time to represent their communities. They've done so with the intention to try and make things better and improve the quality of life for those who live and work in their ward and the wider council area, because they want to make a difference, irrespective of party or non-party. The role of a councillor is a vocation and cannot be compared to any other job, and a huge commitment, as a role does not make you makes you very accessible and on call, living in the heart of your communities, and not one that anyone takes lightly. While there are many aspects that can be challenging and sometimes frustrating, it's balanced with a huge satisfaction of being able to help your constituents. And so my thanks go to all the elected members, and with those that are going forward for the re-election, all the very best for the campaign ahead, and best wishes to those that are looking to retire or move on to other things. I will give them more time to spend with family and friends and explore the interests that they want to take forward, and wish them well. I would, however, want to make specific mention of my own members that are retiring, and Councillor Gordon Hughes and Councillor David Alexander. Gordon and I were both elected to the council in 2007 cohort and have gone through the council term together. Gordon will be missed for his contributions at council and committee, being well read, that he always had a quote suitable for the occasion. Even if it did take a little bit of time to get to the crux of the point of the question, but always enjoyable, interesting, and on occasions intriguing. Gordon is also renowned over the years for his timekeeping. You could always rely on Gordon to just be that wee bit late. On occasions, we were leaving the Joint Valuation Board meetings as Gordon was driving in. However, lockdown and the move to virtual meetings has solved that problem, as Gordon has embraced the digital age and often is the first to join the meetings. Gordon's been a diligent in his role as convener of Civic, keeping on track, and as housing convener, and put a huge effort into ensuring that the community of the Upper Braes voices were heard on planning issues. I want to publicly give my thanks to Gordon for his dedication to his role and constituents over the last 15 years, and wish him well, knowing that he will still be keeping his hand in as there's still the next referendum to win. And turning to my ward colleague, my closest friend and political mentor, David Alexander. David is the longest serving councillor in Falkirk Council at 34 years, continuous service, having repeatedly been returned at successive elections, often with the highest number of votes. Length of service demonstrates such a significant commitment to local government. David has made a huge contribution to local government, to his communities he has represented over the years, and to Falkirk Council. I know that the communities have changed due to boundary changes over the years that he's represented, but he holds them very dear to him, and the well-being of not just those within the Falkirk North Ward, but across the district. He would always go the extra mile, often to the frustration of officers, but ensuring that he got the best possible outcome for his constituents. David first stood in the Victoria Ward in 1980 and then again in 1984, but won the ward in 1986 at a by-election. Quickly established himself and also won the respect of other elected members across the political divide, receiving praise and encouragement following debates within the chamber. He again held the ward again in 1992. John Constable recognised the talent that David had very quickly as a politician and took him under his wing, coaching and becoming his mentor. David then took over the leadership of the SNP group from John Constable in 1992 when John became Provost. He was affectionately known as the boy David, reflecting on his youth compared to others, and what has become his surrogate family, particularly John and Harry Constable and Beth Eaglesham, keeping them all in check. And that was repaid tenfold throughout the years as John and Harry's health deteriorated. He contested and won again the ward in 1995 when the regions were dissolved and unity authorities were established. In 1999, the old Victoria ward was obliterated under the boundary review and it became the Middlefield ward. In 2001, David led the SNP into a partnership with the independent councillors to take the administration after the SNP won a by-election in Keneal and White Cross ward with Andrew Graham. An administration that was tipped to fail but remained in office until 2007. David's skills were also recognised at party level as he was appointed first ever local government convener. Following a successful by-election in 2002, David put together the SNP partnership with independent councillors, and David became the council leader to one of the most successful administrations with significant achievements. David, as leader of Falkirk Council, led very much from the front, and his administration delivered on significantly key projects, some which will be a lasting legacy to the people of Falkirk. The award-winning economic strategy of My Futures in Falkirk, formed partnerships such as Falkirk and Stennismuir football clubs to build new facilities at Oakville View and Falkirk Stadium, the Helix and the Kelpies, a concept which grew out of the local community asking for a bit of scrub land to be tidied up with a few trees planted, and winning the largest ever lottery award. Not to mention the regeneration of Stennismuir Town Centre and the plans put in place for Denny Town Centre and the retention and reopening of the Hippodrome Cinema in Bowness, and so much more. That is a legacy to be proud of and one that will last for many a year to come. Just as John Constable was a mentor to David, David has been mine. And I don't think I would have been able to have done the job without his constant guidance and support, and my heartfelt thanks to him for over those years. Falkirk Council will be a very different place without him, and I will miss him. As everyone will know, David's health has over the last few years in particular given him some challenges. And while he steps back from frontline politics to spend more time with friends and family, as well as continuing to support lifelong supporter of Falkirk Football Club through good times and bad, he will also continue to fight for a socially just Scotland that can only come with Scottish independence. I wish you well in your retirement, David. Thank you.
Thank you. To Councillor Kerr to talk about his colleagues, I would just like to say a few words. First of all, Councillor Hughes, you're a wonderful chap. You're a true gentleman. Although, as Councillor Meiklejohn says, sometimes you go around the houses before you get to the bus stop. The fact is that you're a very knowledgeable individual. I've dealt with you on a number of occasions. We wish you really well in your retirement. In fact, if you rush away just now, you can still get your papers in. Fine. On Councillor David Alexander, can I say this, and I'll say this sincerely. We've not always been the best of friends. We've fell out on a number of occasions, but I'm going to say this. I've known Councillor Alexander since I came in 30 years ago, and Councillor David Alexander is one of the finest councillors that I've seen in local government. And I'll say that most sincerely. Councillor Alexander could have been an MP, he could have been an MSP, but the fact is that he wanted to work in his community of Falkirk, and he's did that wonderfully well. We all realise that David's got problems, medical problems, and we wish him well in his retirement, but he'll never be forgotten as far as I'm concerned. The fact is that David, that's what we called him in the initial stages, but the fact is he was a legend and he always was.
I wish you'd have got the leader of the council to go last. It kind of makes it hard. No, for our two members of our group that are retiring, Malcolm Nichol. Malcolm first joined council in 1987 in Grangemouth Ward. I wasn't in Grangemouth Ward at the time, it was split up. But Malcolm has served the council with a break of 3 years from 1997 to 2000 when he had health issues. But an overall over 30 years. And Malcolm's dedication to the Scottish Conservative Unionist group in Falkirk has been immense. As the leader says regarding David being her mentor, Malcolm has been mine in the 5 years that I've been an elected member. Sometimes you get the answer that you want from Malcolm. Sometimes you get the answer that you didn't want, and he can tell you that that's the answer, because as he says in his own words, he's never wrong. But Malcolm's business assets have grown arms and legs over the last couple of years, and he feels that he couldn't give justice to the both ventures. So for Malcolm and your retirement, we wish you well from our group, and I'm sure that the people who have been here a long time will have had many conversations with Malcolm, and he will miss the council. Going over to my gentleman on my left-hand side here, John Patrick. John joined the council in 1996 when the late Roy Thompson passed away, and John came in a by-election for the Woodlands ward. John has been an ambassador for our group for many, many years, and said earlier on by Dana that sometimes people give blood for their group, and only recently John just gave some blood, not a transfusion service, but when he was leafleting and the dog bit his finger. But John, I could say probably for the 5 new elected members who came in 2017, if it wasn't for John Patrick's encouragement, none of them would have put themselves forward. So John will be very sadly missed in our group. I don't think that he will be retired in the House, because I don't think Isabel will allow him. And we hope that both our retiring councillors who shared an office in the council buildings for many, many years, we just hope that some of their knowledge is rubbed off on the newer councillors. And like the leader of the council, I personally, on behalf of the group, like to wish everybody who's not standing again a happy retirement, and for them who are putting their names in the hat once again, or any new prospective candidate, if successful, embrace the challenge, and good luck. Thank you very much, Provost.
Thank you. Just say a quick word before I bring Councillor Bissett in. Councillor Patrick, as the Provost, and an opportunity to speak. Patrick is in the same ilk as Gordon Hughes. He's a gentleman, a thorough gentleman, and very, very knowledgeable as well. What you don't know about Councillor Patrick is that I remember a way back in the 80s when I came back from living in the Persian Gulf at the time, and Councillor Patrick was the manager of the Bank of Scotland in Bonnybridge, and I was wanting to set this business up. So I was away and I was getting a course done, and then I had a meeting with Councillor Patrick, and I went in there with my portfolio and gave him it. And what did John say? No chance. But anyway, John. But I haven't forgotten that, John. I haven't forgotten that. But you've been a wonderful servant, and as for Councillor Nicholl, I've been a great friend of Councillor Nicholl for years and years. Councillor Nicholl's in the same sort of statue as Councillor Alexander. He's a living legend, and when he was the chairman or convener of the licensing board, he had a tremendous reputation. So I'm going to bring you in now, Councillor Kerr. Bissett.
Thanks very much, Provost. And first of all, I would like to thank yourself for your term as a Provost, and perhaps you never got a fair crack at the whip with the coronavirus. But you've always been very supportive of me, and you've helped me on numerous occasions, and I know how active you've been across the district, so I certainly would like to thank you on behalf of the Council for your dedication and commitment. And I would echo the sentiments about Councillor Hughes and Councillor Alexander. I've always found Councillor Alexander to be very fair, dedicated man, true to his cause, which I respect. I don't agree with it, but I respect that. And he's always takes a balanced, fair view, and I've enjoyed the to and fro over the years. And same with Councillor Patrick, who, just like Councillor Hughes, is indeed a gentleman, and I thoroughly enjoyed their company and their chat over the years. And same with Councillor Nicholl, who I think he's quite opinionated, and but I've always found him to be quite, I was going to say fair there, but I don't think that's right. So I'd also like to thank all the officers. I mean, without the officers there working away, we couldn't do our job. So I'd like to say thanks to all the officers who've been work away in the background diligently and produce all these reports for us, and then only for us to throw half them out. So, so we have 3 members leaving our group. So I'd like to start, just can I say a few brief words about Joan Coombs. Joan is no wallflower, as we all know, and she always challenges the status quo. And she's been a councillor for 10 years, first in Grangemouth and then Carsconaird and Price. And I've great admiration for Joan, the way she's a proper socialist and stands up for what she believes in, and always challenges and wants to see things done properly. And she stands up for her constituents and believes in the social movement, so the socialist movement. So I really would like to thank Joan for her contribution, and she's very politically astute, and she's going to be missed in the Labour group. So I really do wish Joan well, Granny Jojo, as she's called, and for her dedicated family person as well. So I really would like to wish Joan well for the future, and I know she'll still be active in the party. Now turning to Councillor Alison Black. What can I say about Alison? 15 years she's been a councillor, dedicated councillor for Grangemouth. She's been the Deputy Provost, and she's been on some, she was with Pat Reid in the past when he was Provost, and she was dedicated to her role. And she's a very caring individual. She was a psychiatric nurse, and she served on the health board and served in the IGB. Her passion is to help people, and that's what Alison's done effectively over the years. Every opportunity that she can do to help the most vulnerable, she's always done it. And she's a street pastor. She's got that caring thing about her overall that just wants to help and nurture people. And Alison is going to be sorely missed in the group as well. So I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Alison for her dedication and commitment and passion over the years. And Councillor Blackwood, Jim, who's sitting to my left here, Jim's been a councillor for 15 years, Denny and Banknock. Previously, Jim was a convener, a union convener. So I kind of set him up for the role in the Labour group as being chair in a Labour group, which isn't easy. And he's managed it very well and kept people in check, though no easy to keep John McLuckie in check when he was in the group. But nevertheless, Jim is always fair. He was always fair to everybody, and he takes that kind of pragmatic approach. And he was dedicated to his community, and he'll be missed in the community. And I'd hoped that he would have changed his mind, but he's not going to change his mind. So, so for me, Jim, I'd just really personally like to thank you for your dedication and service to the Labour group and to the council over the years. And same with Joan and Alison, their service to the council and the public has been incredible over the years, just like everybody else that's standing down. And sometimes you hear people, you read about people saying, you know, the council would be better off if councillors took a pay cut and got rid of their big bonuses. And you think to yourself, well, if only they knew, you know, that we don't do it particularly for the money. You know, it's because all of us are committed to public service and helping the people that elect us, not just the people that elect us, but everybody. And that's what we're here for. And we're all passionate about what we do. So for those that are retiring, I really do wish you well for the future. And I look forward to meeting up with you at some point. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much for your sentiments. I just echo them. I know that everybody's waiting to go down. Just echo the sentiments, especially about Joan and Alison. And as for Councillor Blackwood, once again, I was trying to get Councillor Blackwood to stay on because he's going to be a missing link in that ward. We don't know who's all going to come in. But the fact is that he's so recognisable. He's got so much credibility in that area. And we're going to miss you sincerely. I think that Councillor Nicholl wanted to come in. Councillor Nicholl?
Thank you, Provost. I wouldn't like to disappoint Robert by not giving an opinion at my very final council meeting. So I am going just to, with your permission, Provost, just to reminisce for a few minutes. I did join the council back in 1983 following the sad death of another member. And in those days, Jim Payton was the chief executive and Frank McKeever was the leader of the council. And Frank was perhaps not the inspiration to me, but believe it or not, but in those days, I was actually very scared of him. He was a very, very knowledgeable person who had the latest information on any subject you chose to speak about. So you really had to learn before you spoke when Frank was around. And I suppose that was good training for what came later on. And I'm sorry I'm not able to be personally with you today to say goodbye to people across the chamber that I've been friends with for many years in some cases, and also to pay tribute not only to my colleague John Patrick, who, as everybody has said, is a superb gentleman, an absolutely great guy, and I'm proud to have been a colleague of his for so many years. And as somebody earlier said, yes, we changed an office, shared an office, and over the two desks we discussed the way forward for Falkirk. We had great hopes of it, and many things did come to pass, but of course not everything on our wish list happened. But over the years, we certainly did try our best, and we are both thankful for the support we received from our respective constituents. I would just like to pay a particular tribute to two people who I was far away from me politically as possibly it could be, and the first is David Alexander. As you yourself have said, Provost, David Alexander is an absolute legend. Very few things we would agree on politically, but I would always acknowledge that David was a superb councillor, a first-class person who could have ventured much further up the tree than Falkirk Council. He could indeed have been an MP and would have been a very, very good MP. So, David, if you're still listening to this, I would just like to say, as Billy has said, we hadn't always seen eye to eye, but the respect that I have for you has no limits. The second person who was, and I don't think is here today, is Dennis Goldie. Dennis, again, I had many run-ins with, but I always had the highest regard for Dennis. He was a great provost. He was always pushing the district. Sometimes we used to groan at the amount of times he appeared in newspaper photographs, but Dennis was another person who very ably represented his constituents and was a first-class councillor. So, as I draw to the end of almost 40 years, but with a 3-year break of political service, Provost, I would just like to come up to date and thank all my colleagues within the Conservative group for their help and support over the last 5 years. To thank the Leader of the Council, Cecil Meikle-John, who has always treated me with great courtesy, and for that I'm very grateful, Cecil. To Robert as Leader of the Labour group as well. To Lynn and to James, who followed me as leaders of the Conservative group, you both have worthily filled my shoes. But in conclusion, Provost, as well as thanking all the officers of the council that I've served with for all these years, I would like to thank you. I'm very grateful for your friendship for the last 25, 30 years. I'm not quite sure when you came in. And, you know, I feel that your time as Provost has been in some way, not diminished, but been affected by COVID and the restrictions that it's placed. But you've always chaired the meetings very, very fairly. And for that, I'm grateful and look forward to you in whatever capacity in the future, doing just as much as you've ever done for the people of Bonnybridge and Larbert. So thank you, Provost. I'm sorry if I've rambled on a bit, but I suppose after almost 40 years, I'm entitled to do that. And farewell to colleagues right across the chamber. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that's everybody now. Councillor Spears, sorry, sir. I haven't forgotten about you, but Councillor Moody, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
The Councillor Spears. Maybe wait for his soup. Okay, then, I think that brings us to the end of this meeting. Once again, thank you very much. And the colleagues to the left, all the council officers, I'm sure we've had great feelings for all the work that they've done to support us. Councillor Coombs, did you want in there? Councillor Spears? Councillor Spears? Councillor Coombs, did you want in? Oh, Councillor Spears, sorry, sir, I've got you.
Come with practically everything.
You're breaking up, Robert, you're breaking up.
Retired members. Yes. You hear okay? The walls. Can you hear me now?
Carry on speaking and we'll see if you're coming through loud and clear. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, just to really concur with everything everybody's said so far about our retired members, but I have a word of warning for them, having been a long-serving member myself and seen many councillors come and go. You never really retire to this job. Once you've been a councillor, you're identified as that. So you'll still be stopped, you'll still be asked questions, you'll still be asked by people for help, and you'll spend your whole time now referring them on to other people. But that's just part of the job. You never escape from it. I wish everybody well in the future. I wish everybody well in the forthcoming elections. I wish yourself well. And it's hopefully it'll be a new council. The most successful council, as you know, was the SNP Independent Council, where we brought so much to the district, not just the Kelpies and the wheel, but the whole area changed and was recognised then as a forward-moving council. And I hope we can get back to that collaboration where that will happen. But I must say, as for my own independent group, we look like the fastest growing group so far, especially in the last few months. So the council will go on, there'll be new people, and the drive to make Falkirk district successful is the main object. So hopefully that will see us through. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Councillor Coombs, you'll be the last person to speak at this Falkirk Council meeting. Councillor Coombs.
No pressure then, and I know everybody's hungry. I'm not going to say very much, but I did want an opportunity to thank the officers. I'm not going to do the history thing. I've obviously just a new girl with just 10 years service. Reiterate what everybody says. good wishes to all members of the council, whether they're standing again or not. It's been a pleasure and an honour to do this job. But I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the officers that I've worked with over the past 10 years, those who are leaving imminently, those who have left over the past couple of years, and those who are also left picking up the pieces. I think we need to remember that officers are here to protect the council, and my leaving wish is that all the new council and councillors appreciate the advice from our professional officers. I'm not going to go through the one by one. I know you've already mentioned Brian. Now, Colin, obviously sitting there beside you, has helped all of us throughout his time. However, I think at all levels of the council, our officers are there to help and advise. As elected members, it is our job to make decisions, but they need to be informed decisions after listening to what our officers are saying to us. Because as far as I know, none of our members are accountants or lawyers or indeed town planners. And I'm tempted to say that this term has been a bit of a lost opportunity. There was an opportunity for members to have found ways to work together to achieve for our communities. The response to COVID was immense, and it showed what's possible when people do work together. It was truly inspirational, and it should be recognised in some positive and long-lasting way for all of us who were affected, who lost loved ones, or who served to support communities at such a difficult time. However, on too many other issues, there was unnecessary conflict, and too many were set in the ways of the past, choosing not to listen to the officers or treating them unfairly when reaching decisions. Members shouldn't pretend to know the job of officers better than the officers themselves, or pass off the advice that they're given as a sales pitch. Now, I just want to finish with, as in all walks of life, we're all different, but I can honestly say that I have respected every single council officer that I've come in contact with in the last 10 years, as I said, at all levels. Some of them don't get any recognition, but I just wanted to put that on record. And my parting wish is that all who take seats, either returning councillors or new councillors, please just work hard, work honestly, and listen to the advice before making the difficult decisions that will be before you. Thanks, Provost.
No, thank you, and best wishes to you, and thank you for those few words. Thank you very much.